Welcome back to Sleep Theories, where we explore the darkest corners of reality and the mysteries that governments desperately want to keep buried. Tonight's story comes from classified documents that were never meant to see daylight, a tale of psychic warfare, ancient intelligences, and the terrifying possibility that our world leaders aren't really in control. If you enjoy these deep dives into the unknown, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that will keep you awake at night. And don't forget to drop your own video ideas in the comments below. Your suggestions fuel our journey into the unexplained. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I witnessed during my years as a contractor for Stanford Research Institute in the late 1970s. For 46 years, I've kept silent about what we really discovered in those sterile laboratories. The official story says we were developing remote viewing capabilities for intelligence gathering, a way to spy on Soviet installations using nothing more than the human mind. That part is true, but it's only the surface layer of something far more disturbing. I was hired to study psychic warfare for the CIA, to push the boundaries of human consciousness in service of national security. But what we really contacted wasn't Russian minds peering through periscopes or nuclear silos hidden in Siberian forests. It was something ancient, something that called itself the Nine, and they claimed they'd been waiting for us to develop the technology to hear them clearly. The Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing program was real. The CIA funding was real. The Department of Defense backing was real. All of this has been declassified and acknowledged. What hasn't been acknowledged are the sessions that didn't map enemy battlefields or describe foreign weapons systems. Those sessions opened doors that should have remained closed forever. I'm telling this story now because I'm 83 years old, and the weight of keeping these secrets has become unbearable. More importantly, I've been seeing signs, patterns in global events, phrases echoing in political speeches, decisions made by world leaders that seem to follow an ancient script. The council, it seems, never went away. They simply found more efficient channels of communication. Chapter 1. The Psychic Lab. Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park didn't look like a place where reality would be systematically dismantled. The buildings were mundane California corporate architecture. Glass, concrete, and endless beige corridors that could have housed any number of tech companies or research firms. But deep within the complex, past multiple security checkpoints and behind doors, marked only with numerical codes, lay the Psychoenergetics Laboratory. Our clean rooms were marvels of 1970s paranoia and scientific precision. Each chamber was encased in a Faraday cage to eliminate electromagnetic interference, with walls lined in copper mesh that created an electrical barrier against outside signals. Inside these metallic cocoons, we had installed the most sensitive monitoring equipment available, EEG machines that could detect the faintest neural activity, EMF sensors that measured electromagnetic fluctuations down to the millimicroampere, and recording devices that captured every whisper, every breath, every ambient sound. The official protocol was elegantly simple. A remote viewer, our term for the psychically gifted individuals we'd recruited from across the country, would be seated in a comfortable chair in one of these chambers. Electrodes would be attached to their temples, their breathing and heart rate monitored continuously. Then they would be given a set of coordinates, longitude and latitude numbers corresponding to a location anywhere in the world, and asked to describe what they saw at those precise geographic points. The coordinators running these sessions would sit in an adjacent observation room, watching vital signs on monitors while taking detailed notes of everything the viewer reported. We tested missile installations in the Soviet Union, submarine bases in the Pacific, terrorist training camps in the Middle East. The accuracy rates were startling, far beyond what statistical chance could explain. Remote viewers would describe architectural details, vehicle counts, even weather conditions at locations they had never visited and couldn't possibly know about through conventional means. But sometimes, instead of describing the concrete bunkers or radar arrays at their assigned coordinates, the viewers would slip into something else entirely. They would begin speaking about entities or intelligences that seemed to exist in the spaces between normal reality. Their brain patterns would shift dramatically during these episodes, alpha waves spiking into configurations we'd never seen before, electromagnetic readings going haywire as if the room itself was responding to some unseen presence. We had a clinical term for these incidents: session bleed-through. The assumption was that the viewers' minds were somehow picking up psychic residue from previous sessions, or allowing their imaginations to contaminate the data. The official response was to note these anomalies in the logs and continue with the mission-critical work of spying on America's enemies. But the anomalies kept getting stronger and more consistent and more unsettling. I remember the first time I witnessed one of these episodes firsthand. The viewer was a soft-spoken woman named Linda Rodriguez, a former nurse from Sacramento who had scored remarkably high on our preliminary psychic assessments. She had been assigned coordinates in northern Kazakhstan, where satellite imagery suggested the Soviets were constructing a new communications facility. Linda settled into her chair, closed her eyes, and began the familiar process of extending her consciousness across thousands of miles. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. She described a flat, windswept landscape, concrete foundations being poured, construction vehicles moving back and forth like toy trucks. Her vital signs remained steady, and the electromagnetic reading showed only the baseline fluctuations we expected during active remote viewing. Then something changed. Linda's expression shifted from the peaceful concentration of psychic focus to something that looked almost like fear. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. The EEG monitors began registering brainwave patterns unlike anything in our databases. Not the usual alpha and theta rhythms of deep meditation, but sharp, synchronized spikes that seemed to pulse in perfect mathematical sequences. "I can't see the construction site anymore," she whispered, her voice taking on an odd, distant quality. "Something is blocking it. Something is addressing me." I leaned forward in my chair, checking the recording equipment to make sure we were capturing everything. This was unprecedented. In 2 years of running remote viewing sessions, we had never had a viewer report direct communication with unknown entities. "There are 9 of them," Linda continued, her eyes still closed but moving rapidly beneath her lids, as if she were watching something invisible to the rest of us. "They're arranged in a circle, but not a circle in space, a circle in time. They say they've been waiting for us to develop this capability. They've been waiting for us to build the bridge." The electromagnetic sensors began registering spikes that should have been impossible. The lights in the observation room flickered once, twice, then settled into an unusual dimness. Even the air seemed to thicken, as if the atmospheric pressure was subtly shifting. "Who are you?" I asked, speaking directly to Linda but hoping that whatever she was in contact with might hear me. Her response came in a voice that was distinctly her own, yet somehow carried harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. "We are the 9 who have guided your species from the beginning. We are the intelligence behind intelligence, the consciousness that shapes consciousness. We have been waiting for your kind to develop the tools to hear us clearly." The session lasted another 47 minutes. During that time, Linda relayed information about humanity's historical development, about consciousness as a fundamental force in the universe, and about a coming alignment that would determine the future of human civilization. When she finally opened her eyes and returned to normal awareness, she had no memory of the extended conversation. To her, she had simply lost focus while trying to view the Kazakhstan site. But we had 47 minutes of audio recordings and electromagnetic data that suggested something impossible had occurred in that copper-lined room. Something that couldn't be explained by conventional psychology, physics, or neuroscience. That was the first time we encountered the 9. It wouldn't be the last. Chapter 2. First Contact. The official memo regarding Linda Rodriguez's anomalous session was filed under unclassified data requiring further analysis. The language was bureaucratic, clinical, designed to make the impossible sound mundane. But those of us who had witnessed the event firsthand knew we were dealing with something that defied every assumption about consciousness, reality, and the limits of human perception. 3 weeks later, we had our second encounter. The viewer this time was Marcus Thompson, a former Air Force radar operator who had requested early discharge after reporting what he called impossible blips on his scopes, objects that moved at speeds no known aircraft could achieve, performing manoeuvres that violated basic principles of aerodynamics. Marcus had scored consistently high on our remote viewing tests, showing particular aptitude for military targets and technical installations. The assigned coordinates pointed to a Soviet naval facility in the Barents Sea, where intelligence analysts suspected the Russians were testing a new class of nuclear submarines. Marcus entered his usual meditative state quickly, his brain waves shifting into the familiar patterns of deep psychic focus. For the first 15 minutes, he provided textbook remote viewing data, detailed descriptions of submarine pens, personnel counts, even technical specifications that would later prove remarkably accurate. Then the electromagnetic readings began to spike. "Wait," Marcus said suddenly, his brow furrowing in concentration. "There's something else here. Something that doesn't belong with the submarines. It's like there's a layer underneath what I'm seeing. A deeper layer." I exchanged glances with Patricia Wells, the session coordinator assigned to Marcus's case. We had briefed her about the Linda Rodriguez incident, but the official policy was to treat each session as an independent data point. Still, the similarities were impossible to ignore. "Can you describe this deeper layer?" Patricia asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus's breathing became more laboured, and the EEG monitors showed the same unusual synchronised spikes we had recorded during Linda's contact episode. The lights in the observation room began to flicker, and I could swear the temperature dropped several degrees. "It's not a place," Marcus said, his voice taking on the same distant quality we had heard from Linda. "It's like a council chamber. There are beings here, ancient ones. They're saying they know about our program. They've been aware of us since we first learned to project consciousness beyond our physical boundaries. The electromagnetic sensors registered readings that should have triggered every safety protocol we had in place. Equipment began malfunctioning, magnetic tapes warping, electronic circuits experiencing inexplicable surges, monitoring devices producing data that made no scientific sense. Yet somehow, the core recording equipment continued functioning, as if whatever was happening wanted to ensure we captured every word. We are the 9 eternal intelligences overseeing Earth, Marcus continued, speaking words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond his individual consciousness. We have guided your species through every major transition, the development of agriculture, the rise of civilization, the discovery of technology. We spoke to your ancestors through dreams and visions. Now we speak to you through the bridges your science has built. This was when I first understood that we weren't dealing with a psychological phenomenon or electromagnetic anomaly. The consistency between Linda's and Marcus's experiences was too precise, too detailed. Both had described exactly 9 entities arranged in a council formation. Both had reported the same claims about guidance throughout human history. Both had used nearly identical language to describe concepts that were far beyond their normal vocabularies or areas of expertise. "What do you want from us?" I asked directly, abandoning any pretense of scientific objectivity. The response came through Marcus, but seemed to arrive from an intelligence far older and more complex than any human mind. "We want nothing from you that we have not already received. Your governments, your leaders, your decision-makers, they have been listening to our guidance for generations, though they call it intuition or strategic insight. What we offer now is direct communication, a clearer channel for the coordination that must come." The session continued for over an hour. During that time, the 9 provided information about historical events, technological developments, and geopolitical patterns that suggested a level of influence over human affairs that was both comprehensive and terrifying. They spoke of guiding the development of nuclear weapons not as tools of destruction, but as catalysts for a new phase of human evolution. They referenced specific leaders, specific decisions, specific moments in history where their influence had shaped the course of human civilization. Most disturbing of all, they insisted that our remote viewing program wasn't an accidental discovery of psychic phenomena. It was the inevitable result of technological development they had been guiding us toward for decades. We hadn't stumbled upon the ability to contact them. We had been methodically prepared for this moment. When Marcus finally returned to normal consciousness, he was exhausted but had no memory of the extended contact session. To his knowledge, he had simply provided intelligence data about Soviet submarine capabilities. But we had recordings, electromagnetic readings, and documentation that suggested something impossible had occurred. The memo I filed that night was much longer and more detailed than the first one. I described the consistencies between the two contact events, the technical anomalies that accompanied each session, and the implications of the information the Nine had provided. I recommended immediate expansion of our research into this phenomenon, with particular attention to the claims about historical guidance and ongoing influence over human affairs. The response from my supervisors was swift and unambiguous. Continue documenting all anomalous data. Maintain higher security protocols. Report any additional contact incidents immediately. What they didn't tell me was that they were already making plans to use the Nine's claimed willingness to communicate for purposes that went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. Plans that would fundamentally alter the relationship between human consciousness and the forces that claim to be guiding our species toward an unknown future. Chapter 3. The pattern emerges. Over the following 18 months, the contact incidents became more frequent and more detailed. Different remote viewers, often working independently and without knowledge of each other's experiences, began reporting encounters with the same 9 entities. The consistency was both remarkable and deeply unsettling. Janet Morrison, a former psychology professor from Berkeley, who had joined our program after demonstrating exceptional psychokinetic abilities, was the third to make contact. During what should have been a routine session targeting a suspected chemical weapons facility in Syria, she suddenly stopped describing buildings and personnel and began speaking about the eternal council that guides the affairs of nations. Robert Kim, a Korean War veteran with a documented history of prophetic dreams, made contact during his 4th session with us. He had been assigned coordinates in the South China Sea, but instead of reporting on naval movements, he began describing 9 ancient intelligences who speak through the spaces between thoughts. Maria Santos, a Catholic mystic from New Mexico who had joined the program after her parish priest referred her to us, made contact while viewing a terrorist training camp in Libya. Her description of the 9 carried religious overtones, but the core information was identical to what we had heard from the other viewers. 9 eternal beings, arranged in a council, claiming responsibility for guiding human development throughout history. The messages delivered through these different individuals were eerily consistent in their content and implications. The 9 invariably described themselves as having guided human civilization from its earlier stages, working through what they called receptive minds in every generation. They referenced ancient Egyptian mythology extensively, identifying themselves with gods like Atum, Ra, and Horus, not as literal deities, but as archetypal representations of cosmic forces that had been misunderstood by primitive human consciousness. More disturbing were their warnings about the misuse of nuclear weapons and their detailed knowledge of classified military programs. Through Janet Morrison, they provided technical specifications for missile guidance systems that had been developed in complete secrecy. Through Robert Kim, they described strategic nuclear policies that were known only to a handful of high-ranking officials. Through Maria Santos, they revealed the locations of undisclosed weapons stockpiles and provided accurate predictions about international conflicts that wouldn't become public knowledge for months. The scientist at Stanford Research Institute began referring to these incidents with a mixture of humour and unease. "We've got our own UFO religion here, became a common joke during staff meetings. But the higher-ups were anything but amused. Each contact session generated immediate interest from our CIA handlers, and reports were forwarded through channels that reached far beyond the normal intelligence community. I began noticing patterns in the electromagnetic anomalies that accompanied each contact session. Every time the Nine spoke through one of our viewers, sensitive equipment throughout the facility would malfunction in specific ways. EEG machines would register brainwave patterns that resembled complex mathematical equations rather than normal neural activity. Magnetic tape recordings would develop warping patterns that, when analysed, revealed fractal geometries and harmonic frequencies that shouldn't have been possible with our equipment. Most unsettling of all, the facility's electrical systems would experience synchronized fluctuations that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the entity communications. The technical staff responsible for maintaining our equipment began reporting increasingly strange incidents. Lights would flicker in sequences that resembled binary code. Computer terminals would display text in languages that none of our linguists could identify. Environmental sensors would register atmospheric pressure changes that corresponded to no known weather patterns or mechanical systems. It became clear that whatever was happening during these contact sessions extended far beyond simple psychic communication. The Nine were somehow able to influence physical systems, manipulate electromagnetic fields, and leave permanent traces of their presence in our most sensitive recording equipment. The implications were staggering. If these entities could affect our instruments, what else might they be capable of influencing? The breakthrough came during a contact session with David Chen, a former NASA engineer who had joined our program after experiencing what he described as technological visions during meditation retreats. David had been assigned coordinates in the Nevada desert, where satellite imagery suggested unusual construction activity that might indicate a new weapons testing facility. Instead of describing buildings or military installations, David began reporting on the cosmic infrastructure that connects all consciousness. According to the entities speaking through him, human technology development had been guided toward creating communication networks that could serve as channels for non-human intelligence. Radio waves, television broadcasts, computer networks. All of these were described as components of a larger system designed to facilitate control and coordination on a planetary scale. Your scientists believe they invented these technologies through research and innovation, the Nine said through David's voice, which had taken on harmonics that made the recording equipment produce overtones and resonances no human vocal cords could create. But every significant breakthrough has been the result of carefully planted ideas, inspiration guided from outside your normal thought processes. The minds that received these innovations believed the ideas were their own. This revelation suggested that the Nine's influence over human development wasn't limited to political and military affairs. They were claiming responsibility for the entire trajectory of technological advancement, describing a centuries-long process of guidance that had culminated in our current ability to establish direct communication with them. The session continued for nearly 3 hours, during which the Nine provided detailed explanations of how various technologies had been developed through inspired guidance, and how these same technologies could be used to expand their influence over human consciousness. They spoke of television broadcasts that carried subliminal frequencies, radio transmissions that could affect human brain chemistry, and computer networks that would eventually allow for direct mind-to-mind interface. Most chilling of all, they described our remote viewing program as just one component of a much larger project designed to identify and train human individuals capable of serving as clear channels for their communications. According to the Nine, similar programs were operating in multiple countries, all working toward the same goal of establishing reliable contact between human consciousness and their eternal counsel. When David returned to normal awareness, he had no memory of the extended session, but we had 3 hours of recordings that suggested human technological development had been systematically guided by non-human intelligence for generations. The implications for everything we believed about scientific progress, innovation, and human achievement were staggering. That night, I found myself staring at the ceiling of my apartment, unable to sleep, trying to process what we had stumbled into. Were we really in contact with ancient intelligences that had been guiding human development for thousands of years? Or had we somehow created a collective delusion that was being reinforced by our own expectations and technological capabilities? Either possibility was terrifying, but the evidence was becoming impossible to deny. The consistency of the communications, the technical anomalies, the accurate information about classified programs, all of it suggested that we were dealing with something far beyond conventional explanations. And according to the Nine themselves, we had only just begun to understand the true scope of their involvement in human affairs. Chapter 4: The Intelligence Connection. By the spring of 1977, our contact sessions with the Nine had attracted attention from the highest levels of the intelligence community. CIA handlers who had previously visited our facility only for routine briefings were now requesting immediate notification whenever a contact episode occurred. Officials whose names I was not cleared to know began appearing in our observation rooms, watching the sessions with intense interest and taking detailed notes that disappeared into classified channels I had no access to. The turning point came during a session with Elena Vasquez, a former nun from San Antonio who had joined our program after experiencing what she described as divine communications during prayer retreats. Elena had been assigned coordinates in Eastern Europe, but within minutes of beginning her remote viewing attempt, she slipped into contact with the familiar council of 9 entities. This time, however, the communication was different. Instead of the general historical and philosophical discussions we had grown accustomed to, the 9 began providing specific intelligence information about Soviet military capabilities, Chinese nuclear programs, and Middle Eastern terrorist networks. The data was incredibly detailed and proved to be remarkably accurate when cross-referenced with information from other intelligence sources. More significantly, the 9 began discussing other groups and individuals who had established contact with them through different methods and in different locations. According to the entities speaking through Elena, similar communications were occurring with researchers in Israel, Egypt, and several other countries whose names were classified above my security clearance level. "Your intelligence agencies are not the first to seek our guidance," the 9 said through Elena's voice, which had developed the same harmonic resonances we had learned to associate with authentic contact sessions. "We have been providing counsel to receptive minds within your government structures for decades. What you call intuition or strategic insight has often been our direct guidance delivered through dreams, meditation, or moments of expanded consciousness." This revelation sent shockwaves through our handling personnel. The idea that foreign governments might have their own contact programs, possibly with the same entities we were communicating with, raised questions about national security that went far beyond conventional intelligence concerns. If the 9 were providing guidance to multiple nations simultaneously, whose interests were they really serving? The response from our CIA supervisors was immediate and comprehensive. Security protocols at the facility were upgraded to the highest classification levels. New personnel were brought in to monitor our sessions, including individuals whose background suggested experience with psychological warfare and information analysis. Most significantly, sessions with the 9 were redesignated from anomalous data collection to strategic intelligence gathering. I began to notice changes in the types of questions our handlers wanted us to ask during contact sessions. Instead of treating the 9 as a curious phenomenon to be studied, they were now being approached as potential intelligence assets. Questions about Soviet capabilities were followed by requests for information about Chinese military planning, Middle Eastern political developments, and technological advances in countries around the world. The entities seemed willing to provide this information, but their responses often carried implications that were deeply unsettling. They would describe military installations with perfect accuracy, then explain how the development of those installations had been influenced by their guidance, provided to key decision-makers through dreams or moments of inspiration. They would predict political events with remarkable precision, then reveal how those events were part of larger patterns they had been orchestrating for generations. During one particularly disturbing session, The Nine described how they had influenced the development of nuclear weapons technology in multiple countries, not through direct technical guidance, but by inspiring the right minds at the right moments to make crucial breakthroughs. According to their account, the nuclear age hadn't been an inevitable result of scientific progress. It had been a carefully orchestrated development designed to create the conditions necessary for what they called planetary consciousness integration. The implications were staggering. If the Nine were telling the truth, then the balance of terror that had defined global politics since World War II wasn't the result of competing national interests. It was part of a larger plan designed by non-human intelligence to force human civilization towards some kind of predetermined outcome. But the most disturbing revelation came during a session in late 1977 when the Nine began discussing the intelligence agencies themselves. Through Margaret Foster, a former Air Force intelligence analyst who had joined our program after experiencing unexplained psychic episodes during her military service, they described how various government organisations had been systematically penetrated by individuals who were unknowingly serving as channels for their guidance. Your intelligence communities believe they are protecting your nation's interests, the Nine said through Margaret's voice, which had developed the characteristic harmonic distortions that accompanied authentic contact. But the decisions they make, the policies they recommend, the strategic directions they pursue, all of these emerge from consciousness that has been shaped by our influence. They serve your nations by serving the greater purpose we have established for your species. This wasn't just a claim about providing occasional guidance to receptive individuals. According to the Nine, entire intelligence operations were being conducted according to plans they had established, with key personnel making decisions based on inspirations that originated from sources beyond human consciousness. The remote viewing program itself, they insisted, had been developed not through scientific innovation, but through carefully guided research that was always intended to establish direct communication channels. The session that changed everything occurred on November the 15th, 1977. The viewer was Thomas Anderson, a former MIT physics professor who had joined our program after developing theories about consciousness as a fundamental force in quantum mechanics. Thomas had been assigned coordinates in the Soviet Union, but instead of making contact with the Nine through the usual process, something unprecedented happened. The entities announced that they wished to speak directly to our government handlers, bypassing the remote viewers entirely and establishing communication with the decision-makers who were ultimately responsible for our program. They claimed to have important information about global developments that required immediate attention from individuals with the authority to act on their guidance. Within hours, arrangements were made for a private session in Washington. I was ordered to accompany Thomas and provide technical support for the contact attempt. The location was a secure facility whose purpose I was not cleared to know, staffed by individuals whose identities I was instructed not to record or remember. The session that took place there lasted over 4 hours and involved communications that went far beyond anything we had experienced at Stanford Research Institute. The Nine provided detailed intelligence about international developments, technological capabilities, and strategic opportunities that seemed to anticipate events months or even years in the future. They spoke of coordination between different government agencies, alignment of policy objectives across multiple nations, and the necessity of preparing for what they called the Great Convergence. Most disturbing of all, they insisted that human intelligence agencies were already operating according to plans they had established, with key personnel receiving guidance through channels they didn't consciously recognise. According to the Nine, the intelligence community wasn't just aware of their existence, it was already under their influence. When the session ended, I was ordered to destroy all recordings and documentation immediately. But before carrying out those orders, I listened to portions of the audio, trying to understand what had really taken place in that secure facility. The voices of the Nine, speaking through Thomas Anderson's vocal cords but carrying harmonics that no human could produce, had delivered a message that challenged every assumption about government, intelligence work, and the nature of political power itself. Your intelligence agencies are already ours. Your decisions are already our decisions. What we offer now is simply more efficient coordination. I burned the tapes as ordered, but the implications of what I had heard would haunt me for the rest of my life. Were we really in contact with ancient intelligences that had been guiding human development for generations? Or had we become participants in something far more sinister? A systematic infiltration of human consciousness by entities whose true nature and ultimate objectives remained hidden behind claims of benevolent guidance. Either way, one thing had become clear. Whatever was happening in that secure facility in Washington represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between human consciousness and the forces that claim to be shaping our world. Chapter 5. Crossing the Line. The Washington session marked a turning point that none of us at Stanford Research Institute fully understood at the time. What had begun as an experimental program to develop psychic intelligence gathering capabilities had evolved into something that challenged the fundamental assumptions about consciousness, reality, and the sources of human decision-making. In the weeks following the private session, changes began occurring throughout our program that suggested our work had attracted attention from levels of government I had never imagined existed. New personnel appeared at the facility. Individuals whose backgrounds were classified beyond my security clearance, whose questions revealed knowledge of our contact sessions that went far beyond what should have been possible, given the compartmentalized nature of intelligence work. The remote viewing sessions continued, but the focus had shifted dramatically. Instead of being asked to gather information about foreign military installations or terrorist activities, our viewers were increasingly tasked with establishing contact with the Nine for what were described as strategic consultation sessions. The entities were no longer treated as an anomalous phenomenon to be studied. They were being approached as intelligence assets whose guidance was actively sought by decision-makers, whose identities I was not cleared to know. The transformation became most apparent during a session with Linda Rodriguez, the soft-spoken former nurse who had made our first documented contact with the Nine. Linda had been brought back to the facility specifically for what was described as a high-priority communication session, with objectives that weren't disclosed to the technical staff. The usual protocols were abandoned, and the session was conducted under security measures that suggested participation by personnel from agencies beyond the CIA. When Linda entered her trance state and established contact with the familiar council of 9 entities, the communication that followed was unlike anything we had recorded before. The 9 began providing specific guidance about policy decisions, strategic initiatives, and coordination between different government agencies. They spoke of preparing the infrastructure for expanded consciousness integration and establishing the frameworks necessary for efficient planetary governance. Most disturbing of all, they began discussing individual government officials by name, describing their psychological profiles, their decision-making processes, and their receptivity to what they called inspirational guidance. According to the 9, key personnel in various agencies were already receiving their influence through dreams, meditation, and moments of expanded awareness, though these individuals believed their insights were emerging from their own analytical capabilities. The transition is accelerating, the 9 said through Linda's voice, which had developed harmonics that made our recording equipment produce overtones and resonances that seemed to affect everyone present in ways we couldn't quantify. Your species has reached the technological and social development necessary for direct integration with our guidance systems. The preliminary phase of unconscious influence is ending. The era of conscious cooperation is beginning. The implications of these statements were staggering, but what happened next was even more significant. One of the unnamed officials observing the session, a man whose presence suggested authority at the highest levels of government, began asking direct questions about specific policy decisions, international negotiations, and strategic initiatives that were apparently under consideration at that time. The 9 responded with detailed recommendations about each topic, providing analysis that went far beyond conventional political or military considerations. They spoke of global developments as components of a larger pattern that had been unfolding for generations, with current events representing carefully orchestrated steps toward what they consistently described as planetary consciousness integration. The session lasted 6 hours, during which the 9 provided guidance on topics ranging from nuclear weapons policy to international economic coordination to technological development priorities. They spoke with intimate knowledge of classified programs, ongoing negotiations and strategic planning that should have been known only to a handful of individuals at the highest levels of government. But the most chilling moment came near the end of the session, when the 9 began discussing the remote viewing program itself. According to the entities, our work at Stanford Research Institute was just one component of a much larger project designed to identify and train human individuals capable of serving as clear channels for their communications. Similar programs were operating in multiple countries, all coordinated according to plans they had established decades earlier. Your intelligence agencies believe they developed these capabilities through research and innovation, the 9 explained through Linda's voice, which had become so resonant with harmonic overtones that it seemed to vibrate through the bones of everyone present. But every significant breakthrough has been the result of carefully guided inspiration. The minds that received these ideas believed they were their own discoveries. This has always been our method of operation. The revelation that our entire program might have been developed according to guidance from the 9 themselves raised questions that went to the heart of human free will and autonomy. If these entities had been influencing the development of psychic research programs, what else might they have been guiding? How many supposedly human innovations and discoveries had actually originated from sources beyond human consciousness? When the session finally ended, Linda had no memory of the extended communication, but the officials present had received 6 hours of guidance on matters of the highest national security importance, delivered through a channel that defied every conventional understanding of intelligence gathering and strategic planning. The aftermath of that session marked the beginning of changes that would fundamentally alter the nature of our work. Within days, several of our most successful remote viewers were reassigned to projects I wasn't cleared to know about. New equipment was installed in our facilities, devices whose purposes weren't explained, but whose presence suggested capabilities far beyond what we had been using for standard remote viewing sessions. Most significantly, I began to notice changes in the behaviour and decision-making patterns of our supervisors and handlers. Individuals who had previously approached our work with scientific skepticism began speaking with certainty about concepts and strategies that seemed to emerge from sources beyond their normal analytical capabilities. Policy decisions that had been under consideration for months were suddenly resolved with clarity and decisiveness that suggested access to information or insights that weren't available through conventional channels. The final session I was permitted to observe took place in March of 1978, involving a viewer whose identity was classified above my security clearance. The communication that occurred during that session was unlike anything we had previously recorded, involving what appeared to be direct coordination between the 9 and government decision-makers on matters of global significance. According to the entities, the preliminary phase of their involvement with human consciousness was ending. The era of indirect influence through dreams, inspiration, and unconscious guidance was being replaced by systems that would allow for direct communication and coordination. The remote viewing program, they insisted, had been developed specifically to create the technological and psychological frameworks necessary for this transition. But the most disturbing revelation came when the 9 began discussing the broader implications of this change. According to their account, human civilization was approaching a critical juncture that would determine the future development of consciousness on Earth. The guidance they had been providing for generations was designed to prepare our species for integration into what they described as a cosmic consciousness network that connected intelligent life throughout the universe. The choice, they explained, was not whether this integration would occur, but how smoothly the transition would proceed. Human resistance to their guidance would result in chaos and suffering. Acceptance and cooperation would allow for an orderly transformation that would preserve human culture while expanding our capabilities beyond current imagination. When that final session ended, I was informed that my security clearance was being upgraded and my assignment was being changed. I would no longer be involved in the remote viewing program, but would instead be working on projects that were described as more directly applicable to national security objectives. I never learned what happened to the remote viewers who had served as channels for the Nine, or what became of the communication systems we had developed. But in the months and years that followed, I began noticing patterns in global events, policy decisions, and technological developments that suggested the influence we had documented was continuing to expand. The question that haunted me then, and continues to haunt me now, was whether we had really been in contact with ancient intelligences offering guidance to humanity, or whether we had become participants in something far more sinister, a systematic infiltration of human consciousness by entities whose true nature and ultimate objectives remained hidden behind claims of benevolent guidance. Either way, one thing had become clear. The line between human decision-making and external influence had been crossed, and there was no going back. Chapter 6. Fallout. After the March 1978 session, the remote viewing program as I had known it was systematically dismantled and restructured. The official explanation was that the project had achieved its initial research objectives and was being transitioned to operational applications that required different security protocols and personnel assignments. What this really meant was that our work with the Nine had attracted attention from levels of government that operated beyond conventional intelligence oversight. I was reassigned to what was described as more practical applications of psychic research. Projects focused on gathering intelligence about Soviet submarine capabilities, Chinese missile programs, and terrorist activities in the Middle East. The work was important and often successful, but it felt hollow after what we had experienced with the Nine. But the changes I noticed in the months following the program restructuring were far more disturbing than my professional displacement. Certain high-ranking military officials and government administrators began using phrases and concepts in their public statements that were identical to language the Nine had used during our sessions. References to global alignment, consciousness integration, and coordinated planetary governance began appearing in classified memos and policy documents. More unsettling were the behavioural changes I observed in individuals who had been present during the later contact sessions. These people, whose names I cannot mention for reasons of national security, began making decisions with a certainty and coordination that suggested access to information sources beyond conventional intelligence channels. Strategic initiatives that had been debated for months were suddenly resolved with unanimous agreement. International policies that had seemed impossible to coordinate across different agencies and departments were implemented with seamless efficiency. The remote viewers who had served as primary channels for the Nine were quietly transferred to projects I wasn't cleared to know about. When I tried to maintain contact with Linda Rodriguez, I was informed that she was working on classified applications in a different facility. Marcus Thompson, Janet Morrison and the others simply disappeared from my professional world, their new assignments protected by security classifications that put them beyond my reach. But the most disturbing development was the expansion of what our staff had begun calling council imagery, beyond the controlled environment of our laboratory sessions. Several of our remaining remote viewers reported being pulled into contact with the Nine even when they were assigned to completely unrelated intelligence targets. The entities seemed to be actively seeking out individuals with psychic capabilities, regardless of whether formal contact sessions had been scheduled. During one particularly unsettling incident, David Chen, who had been reassigned to gathering intelligence about Chinese military installations, reported that the Nine had interrupted his session to provide what they called updated guidance about American foreign policy initiatives. According to David, the entities expressed satisfaction with the progress of their integration with human decision-making systems and indicated that the preliminary phase of their contact program had been successfully completed. The whispered nickname among our remaining staff members was Langley's New Oracles, a reference that suggested our colleagues understood that whatever was happening with the Nine had extended far beyond our small research facility and into the highest levels of government operations. Chapter 7. what was left behind. I left the Stanford Research Institute program in early 1982, officially to pursue private consulting work in the defense industry. In reality, I was struggling to process the implications of what I had witnessed and needed distance from a world where the boundaries between human consciousness and external influence had become impossible to define. But the patterns I had learned to recognise during my years with the remote viewing program followed me into civilian life. The random number generators in my private electronics laboratory began showing non-random statistical spikes during major international events. Wars, economic crises, political transitions that seemed to unfold according to scripts that had been written years in advance. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental, too precise to be explained by conventional theories about chaos and probability. More disturbing were the audio anomalies I began detecting in radio broadcasts, television transmissions, and even telephone conversations. Using equipment I had acquired from my government work, I started identifying frequency patterns and harmonic resonances that were identical to what we had recorded during the 9 contact sessions. These signals were embedded in normal communications at levels below conscious perception, but they were there. Subliminal influences that seemed designed to affect human consciousness in ways we were only beginning to understand. The breakthrough came in 1985, when I was analysing electromagnetic recordings from a major political rally that had been broadcast live on national television. Hidden within the audio spectrum of the broadcast were harmonic frequencies that exactly matched the signature patterns we had documented during our most significant contact sessions with the 9. The implications were staggering. If these entities could embed their influence in mass media transmissions, their ability to shape human consciousness was virtually unlimited. Over the following years, I documented similar patterns in broadcasts surrounding major political events, economic policy announcements, and international crises. The correlation suggested that the 9's influence over human affairs had expanded far beyond the classified government programs where I had first encountered them. They appeared to have developed methods of reaching mass consciousness directly, using the same communication technologies they had claimed responsibility for inspiring. But the most chilling confirmation of my suspicions came in 1991, in the form of an envelope that arrived at my home address with no return address or postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed in the centre. "The Council thanks you for your transcription." The paper itself was unremarkable, standard office stock that could have come from anywhere. But when I analysed it using spectrographic equipment, I found trace electromagnetic signatures that were identical to the patterns we had recorded during the most intense 9 contact sessions. Someone, or something, had wanted me to know that my work during those years at Stanford Research Institute was still being remembered and appreciated. The message was both an acknowledgement and a warning. I had been a witness to the beginning of something that had grown far beyond the scope of any government program. The 9, whatever they really were, had achieved a level of integration with human consciousness that made their influence virtually undetectable to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. Chapter 8. The Creeping Question. Now, at 83 years old, I find myself watching global events unfold with the terrible knowledge of someone who's seen behind the curtain of human decision-making. The patterns I learned to recognise during my years with the remote viewing program are everywhere, once you know what to look for. Political leaders speak with identical phrases across different countries and ideological systems, as if they were drawing from the same source of inspiration. International crises develop according to scripts that seem designed to produce specific outcomes, rather than emerging from the natural chaos of competing interests. Technological developments proceed along trajectories that seem to have been planned decades in advance, with breakthroughs occurring precisely when they would be most useful for expanding systems of communication and control. The question that has haunted me for 46 years remains as urgent today as it was during those first contact sessions in the Stanford Research Institute laboratory. What did we really make contact with? Were the 9 genuine ancient intelligences offering guidance to help humanity navigate the challenges of technological development and global coordination? Their knowledge of historical events, their accurate predictions about international developments, and their detailed understanding of human psychology suggested capabilities that went far beyond anything that could be explained by conventional theories about consciousness or reality. Or were we participants in something far more sinister, a systematic psychological operation designed to make us believe we were receiving guidance from benevolent entities, while actually being manipulated by forces whose true nature and ultimate objectives remained hidden? The consistency of their messages, the technical anomalies that accompanied their communications, and the subsequent changes in government behaviour all suggested possibilities that were deeply disturbing. The third possibility is the one that terrifies me most, that it doesn't matter whether the 9 were real ancient intelligences or elaborate deceptions, because the effect has been the same. Human decision-making at the highest levels of government and international coordination has been influenced by sources that operate beyond democratic oversight, constitutional limitations, or ethical constraints. Whether that influence comes from genuinely non-human intelligence or from human agencies using advanced psychological manipulation techniques, the result is a world where the choices that shape our collective future are being made according to plans that were established by entities whose true identities and motivations remain unknown. But I know this much with absolute certainty. Intelligence agencies don't waste money on programs that don't work. The remote viewing research at Stanford Research Institute produced results that were valuable enough to justify continued funding for decades. The contact sessions with the 9 generated information that was accurate enough and useful enough to attract attention from the highest levels of government. Whatever was happening in those copper-lined rooms, whatever was speaking through our remote viewers, whatever was influencing the electromagnetic equipment and leaving harmonic signatures in our recordings, all of it was real enough to change the course of classified programs and government policies. And if the 9 were real, if their claims about guiding human development were accurate, then the question becomes, what are they guiding us toward? What is the ultimate objective of the planetary consciousness integration they described? What does it mean for human free will and autonomy if our most important decisions are being shaped by influences we cannot see, understand, or control? The evidence I witnessed during my years with the program suggests that whatever the 9 represented, they achieved their goal of establishing communication channels with human decision-makers. The patterns I have observed in global events since that time suggest that their influence has continued to expand, using technologies and methods that go far beyond the controlled laboratory sessions where I first encountered them. Whether they were ancient intelligences offering guidance to humanity, sophisticated psychological operations designed to manipulate government officials, or something else entirely, one thing is certain: they had the attention of people with the power to shape our world. And based on the patterns I continue to observe in global events, media communications, and technological development, they may still have that attention today. The Council, whatever its true nature, achieved its primary objective: establishing direct communication with human consciousness at levels that could influence the course of civilization itself. Whether that influence has been benevolent or malevolent, whether it represents an opportunity for human advancement or a threat to human autonomy, remains the most important question our species has never consciously asked. But the time for conscious questioning may be running out. The integration the 9 described appears to be accelerating, and the choices that will determine our future are being made by minds that may no longer be entirely our own. Have you ever wondered why ancient monuments across the globe seem to align with mathematical precision? Why your GPS glitches in certain locations? Or why governments classify research about electromagnetic anomalies? Tonight's story might make you question every map you've ever trusted. Before we begin this journey into the hidden grid beneath our feet, I want to thank M10rapin for suggesting this topic. Your video ideas fuel these late-night tales, so please leave your suggestions in the comments below. And if you're ready to uncover the mysteries that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories. Now, dim your lights, settle in, and prepare to discover the truth about the lines that connect our world. My name is Alex Morrison, and I used to believe maps told the truth, As a GIS analyst, that's Geographic Information Systems for those who don't spend their days staring at satellite data and topographical overlays, I thought I understood how the world was organised. Cities here, mountains there, rivers cutting through valleys in predictable patterns carved by millions of years of erosion. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything could be mapped, measured and catalogued. That was before I found the pattern. It started innocently enough. Tuesday morning, October 15th, 8:47 a.m. I was hunched over my dual monitors in a cramped office in Brussels, working for Steinberg Construction Consortium. They'd hired me to evaluate potential sites for a new high-speed rail corridor that would connect Prague to Paris, part of the EU's Green Transportation Initiative. Routine work: overlay environmental data, check for protected sites, identify geological challenges. I'd done it 100 times before, but this time something was different. I was cross-referencing archaeological databases with our proposed route when I noticed it. A series of Neolithic monuments, stone circles, burial mounds, ancient wells, formed an almost perfect line across the landscape. Not just a few sites clustered together, but dozens of them, stretching for hundreds of miles. The proposed railway cut directly across this invisible corridor. At first, I laughed it off. Pattern recognition gone wild, I told myself. The human brain loves to find connections when none exist. But then I pulled up the magnetic anomaly data from the European Space Agency's swarm satellites. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The magnetic variations followed the exact same line. Every single monument sat on a point of electromagnetic disturbance. The precision was impossible. We're talking about structures built 5,000 years apart by cultures that supposedly never interacted, aligned within meters of a magnetic corridor that modern science had only just detected. I should have deleted the file, should have marked the route as approved and moved on with my life. Instead, I zoomed out. The line didn't stop at the edge of my survey area. It continued east through Romania, Turkey, Iran, west through England, across the Atlantic. I pulled up global archaeological databases, my fingers trembling as I plotted point after point. Stonehenge, Avebury, the Externstein, the Oracle at Delphi. Each site fell perfectly along extended trajectories of the same geometric pattern. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. "Morrison, railway assessment due by noon. Stop whatever rabbit hole you're going down." But I couldn't stop. I'd found something that shouldn't exist. A planetary grid mapped by ancient peoples who supposedly thought the Earth was flat, following electromagnetic patterns we'd only discovered in the last century. Either I was losing my mind or I'd stumbled onto the greatest archaeological discovery of the millennium. I chose to believe the latter. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, I stood in a frost-covered field 40 kilometres outside Prague, watching my equipment fail in ways that defied every principle of engineering I knew. After discovering the alignment, I'd convinced Steinberg to let me conduct field surveys along the proposed route. Geological stability assessment, I'd called it. What I really wanted was to stand on one of these intersection points myself, to take readings that might explain how ancient peoples had detected magnetic anomalies without compasses or magnetometers. The morning had started normally enough. I'd parked my van on a dirt road near the village of Holubice, unloaded my survey equipment, and hiked 2 kilometres to the first monument site, a circle of weathered standing stones that locals called Devil's Dance. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and mist clung to the valleys like cotton wool. I set up my differential GPS unit first, waiting for it to lock onto satellites. The device chirped, showing full signal strength. Then, as I walked toward the centre of the stone circle, the screen flickered. Acquiring satellites. Signal lost. Acquiring satellites. I checked my phone. Same problem. The GPS app showed my location jumping wildly, placing me first in Prague, then Vienna, then somehow in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. My professional-grade survey unit, accurate to within centimetres under normal conditions, couldn't even determine which continent I was on. The electromagnetic field meter came next. The moment I switched it on, the needle slammed against the maximum reading and stayed there, quivering like it was fighting against invisible restraints. I'd seen similar readings near power lines or transformer stations, but we were in the middle of farmland. The nearest electrical infrastructure was kilometres away. You shouldn't be here. I spun around. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes the pale blue of winter sky. "I'm sorry," I called out in my broken Czech. She switched to accented English. "This place. It's not for outsiders, not for their machines." She gestured at my equipment with a gnarled finger. "I'm just conducting surveys for the railway," I explained, walking toward her, "making sure the ground is stable." She laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Stable? This line has been here since before the first stones were raised, before your railways, before your cities. Our ancestors knew to respect it, to build their monuments as, jak se říká, anchors, to keep the energy flowing properly." "Energy?" I pulled out my tablet, showing her the magnetic anomaly map. "You mean this? You know about the electromagnetic patterns?" Her eyes widened. For a moment she looked genuinely frightened. "You've mapped it? The whole grid?" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You must stop. Some knowledge isn't meant to be documented. They will come for you if you continue." "Who will come?" But she was already walking away, moving faster than seemed possible for someone her age. "The ones who already know," she called back. "The ones who've always known." I wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but my drone chose that moment to fall out of the sky. No warning, no gradual descent. 1 second it was hovering steadily. The next it dropped like a stone, smashing into the frozen ground 20 metres away. As I ran to retrieve it, I noticed something through the trees, a structure that didn't belong. Hidden behind a thick stand of pines was a concrete building, brutalist in design, with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. Military architecture, Cold War era by the look of it. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately. Instead, I collected my broken drone and hiked toward the building. The structure was abandoned but not ancient. Rust streaked the metal door, which hung open on failing hinges. Inside, fluorescent lights dangled from exposed wiring, and the walls were covered in mould that formed patterns like continental drift. But it was the maps that stopped me cold. The entire north wall was covered in them. Topographical maps, geological surveys, electromagnetic readings, layers upon layers of data, some dating back to the 1960s. Red strings connected pins at various locations, creating a web that stretched across Europe. And running through it all, marked in thick black ink, was the same line I'd found, the same impossible alignment. In the corner, barely legible, someone had written, "Earth Grid Project, classified, destroy after review." I pulled out my phone to photograph everything, but the camera wouldn't focus. Every image came out distorted, as if the very air in the room was bending light. I tried sketching what I saw instead, my hands shaking from more than cold. A metal filing cabinet in the corner had been forced open, its contents mostly removed or destroyed, but wedged behind the bottom drawer I found a single folder. Water damage had made most of it illegible, but I could make out fragments. Electromagnetic conductivity peaks at intersection points. Ancient structures appear to function as regulatory nodes. Catastrophic potential if grid destabilizes. Project terminated by Joint Commission directive. The last page was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a massive antenna array in what looked like Alaska, the same distinctive design I'd seen in conspiracy documentaries about HAARP. But this photo was dated 1971, decades before HAARP officially existed. A sound outside made me freeze, the crunch of footsteps on frost. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. I shoved the folder inside my jacket and slipped out the back window, dropping into a thorny hedge that tore at my clothes. Through the trees, I could see dark vehicles pulling up to the building, men in unmarked uniforms spreading out to surround it. I ran, not toward my van, they'd certainly have someone watching it, but deeper into the forest, following a deer trail that wound toward the next village. Behind me I heard shouting in a language I didn't recognise. Not Czech, not German, something else. It took me 4 hours to circle back to my vehicle, approaching from the opposite direction through farmland. The van was untouched, but I knew they'd let me go. Let me run. They wanted to see what I'd do next, who I'd contact. As I drove away, hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I realised the old woman had been right. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be documented, but it was too late now. I'd seen the grid, seen evidence that governments knew about it, had studied it, had classified it, and I was going to find out why. My apartment in Brussels became a command centre for obsession. After the encounter at Holobici, I'd returned to work, filed a bland report recommending further geological assessment, and pretended everything was normal. But every evening, I locked my door, pulled the blinds and dove deeper into the mystery. The coffee table disappeared under printed maps. The walls became a spider web of string and pins connecting sites across continents. I'd stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night, surviving on espresso and the electric thrill of discovery. The pattern was everywhere once you knew how to look. Start with the obvious ones, the monuments everyone knows, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Easter Island. Plot them on a globe, not a flat map, and they formed geometric relationships so precise they could have been placed by satellite guidance. The Great Pyramid sits at the exact centre of Earth's landmass. Easter Island is antipodal to the Indus Valley civilization sites. Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, and Easter Island form a perfect Great Circle route, but those were just the famous nodes. The real revelation came when I started plotting lesser-known sites. Every major ancient city sat on the grid. Babylon, Persepolis, Constantinople, Carthage, all built at intersection points where multiple energy lines converged. The Romans, master engineers, had built their road system following these same invisible highways. The Silk Road traced a major east-west corridor. Even modern cities clustered around the same points: New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. I pulled declassified documents from every database I could access. The US Freedom of Information Act, the UK National Archives, leaked Soviet files from the fall of the USSR. Most of it was useless. Budget reports, personnel transfers, bureaucratic minutiae. But buried in the noise were fragments of something bigger. Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program, included maps marking psychic hotspots that matched my grid lines perfectly. Operation Paperclip scientists had studied Earth radiation patterns in the 1950s. The Soviets had run something called Program Sputnik Grid that involved placing sensors at ancient monument sites across their territory. The most intriguing find came from a 1962 Canadian military report about the construction of the DEW line, the distant early warning radar system across the Arctic. An engineer named Captain Lawrence Brennan had noted persistent electromagnetic anomalies at certain locations that required special shielding for equipment. His proposed sites for radar stations, plotted on my grid, formed a perfect arc along a major ley line. But the document that changed everything was a leaked memo from 1997, source unknown, that had circulated on conspiracy forums before being scrubbed from most of the internet. I found it cached on an obscure Russian server. 2. Joint Chiefs Special Projects Division Aura. Earth grid stability concerns. Recent seismic activity correlates with disruption of natural electromagnetic corridors via urban development and mineral extraction. Recommendation: establish monitoring stations at key intersection points under cover of telecommunications infrastructure. See attached list of priority sites. The attached list was gone, but the implication was clear. They knew. The military, the intelligence agencies, the energy companies, they all knew about the grid, and they were using it. I started mapping modern installations against the ley lines. The correlation was undeniable. HARP in Alaska, ISCAT in Norway, Sura in Russia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico. Every major ionospheric research facility sat directly on an intersection point. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN traced a circle around one of the most powerful convergence zones in Europe. Nuclear power plants clustered along the lines. Major military bases were built at intersection points. Even the routes of underground fibre optic cables followed the ancient paths, as if modern engineers were unconsciously drawn to the same energy corridors their ancestors had marked with standing stones. My phone rang at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Stop digging. The voice was electronically distorted, genderless. Who is this? Someone trying to help you. You found the grid. Congratulations. Now forget about it before you end up like the others. What others? Bruce Cathy, John Michel, Ivan Sanderson, all the researchers who got too close to the truth. Heart attacks, car accidents, sudden illnesses. Very convenient. My blood chilled. I knew those names. Independent researchers from the 60s and 70s who'd written about Earth energy grids. All died relatively young under questionable circumstances. Why are you warning me? Because the grid is destabilising. The ancients built monuments as regulators, keeping the energy in balance. Modern construction is disrupting the flow. Mumbai, 2006. Haiti, 2010. Fukushima, 2011. Those weren't random natural disasters. They were pressure releases along fractured ley lines. That's impossible. Electromagnetic fields don't cause earthquakes. The voice laughed, bitter and electronic. The electromagnetic fields are just what we can measure. The grid is deeper than that. It's the planet's nervous system, its circulation, and we're giving it a stroke, one skyscraper at a time. Then we need to warn people. With what evidence? Mystical energy lines, ancient wisdom. You'll be dismissed as a crackpot. Unless ... The voice paused. Unless you can prove the energy is real, measurable, usable. How? Return to the grid, not with standard equipment. That's designed to filter out the frequencies you need to detect. Build your own sensor. Copper coils, crystal oscillators, very specific specifications. I'm sending you the plans now. My laptop pinged with an encrypted file. One more thing, the voice said. When you record the surge, you'll have about 6 hours before they track the signature back to you. Use that time wisely. The line went dead. I opened the file. The schematic looked like something Tesla might have designed after a fever dream. Multiple copper coils in a complex geometric arrangement, connected to crystal oscillators and frequency analyzers. The materials list was surprisingly mundane. Everything available from electronic suppliers. It took me 3 days to build it, working in secret in a rented storage unit outside the city. The device looked like abstract art more than scientific equipment, all gleaming copper spirals and crystal matrices. But when I powered it on, every LED lit up green. It was detecting something. Now I just had to be crazy enough to test it. The academic forum was my first mistake. Well, second, if you count building the sensor. But hubris makes fools of us all, and I needed someone, anyone, to verify I wasn't losing my mind. Geoanomalies.net was a small community, mostly graduate students and professional geologists sharing unusual findings. I created a throwaway account and posted a conservative summary. Electromagnetic anomalies correlating with ancient monument placement, seeking peer review. I attached 3 images, my overlay map of European sites, a graph showing magnetic field fluctuations, and 1 photo from the abandoned military outpost with the classified stamps carefully cropped out. Within an hour, I had 2 responses. A geology professor from Munich confirmed similar observations near Bronze Age sites. A student from Oxford posted links to academic papers about telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust. Then, 90 minutes after posting, my thread vanished. Not deleted with a removed by moderator message. Gone, like it had never existed. The cached version on Google disappeared. The other users who'd responded found their comments erased from their own post histories. My laptop screen flickered. A chat window opened without my input. Admin. Your recent activity has been flagged for review. Me. What activity? Who is this? Admin. Consider this a courtesy warning. Cease your current research immediately. Me. Or what? Admin. Or we stop being courteous. The chat window closed itself. When I tried to screenshot the conversation, my laptop blue-screened. It took 20 minutes to restart, and when it did, my hard drive had been wiped. Not formatted, wiped. Every sector overwritten with random data multiple times. A technique that made recovery impossible. Thank God for cloud backups, I thought, logging into my secure server. Empty. 3 years of research, gone. Even my email accounts had been purged. I still had physical copies of the most important findings, hidden in a safety deposit box across town. But the message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time. The next morning I arrived at work to find my keycard deactivated. Security escorted me to a conference room where my supervisor, Mr. Steinberg himself, sat with two people I'd never seen before. A woman in a severe black suit and a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, both with a kind of posture that screamed military. Alex, Steinberg began, sweating despite the air conditioning. These representatives from the European Infrastructure Security Division have some concerns about your recent surveys. I'd never heard of the European Infrastructure Security Division. I doubted it existed on any official registry. The woman smiled without warmth. Mr. Morrison, your work on the railway project has been exemplary. However, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your research that fall outside the project's scope. I'm thorough, I said. I investigate all factors that might affect construction, including archaeological sites hundreds of kilometres from the proposed route. The man's accent was impossible to place, including electromagnetic phenomena that have no bearing on rail safety. I believe they do have bearing. What you believe is irrelevant. The woman pulled out a tablet showing my deleted forum post. Discussing classified military research on public forums is a serious offence. Classified? I found those maps in an abandoned... Mr. Morrison... Her voice could have frozen helium. You're being terminated from this project, effective immediately. Your severance package is generous, contingent on signing this NDA. She slid a document across the table. You'll cease all research related to electromagnetic anomalies, ancient monuments, or what you call ley lines. Any violation will result in prosecution under the European Security Act. I looked at Steinberg. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And if I refuse? The man leaned forward. Your visa expires in 6 weeks. Your bank accounts are already frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. Your academic credentials are under review. Would you like me to continue? The threat was clear. Sign and walk away with something or lose everything and possibly face imprisonment. I signed. They confiscated my company laptop, my access badges, even my parking pass. The woman handed me a business card with no name, just a phone number. If you remember any details you'd like to share about your research, call this number. We reward cooperation. I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, my colleagues staring as security watched me pack my desk. The personal items fit in a single cardboard box, a coffee mug, some photos, a stress ball shaped like Earth. They even checked those before letting me leave. On the tram ride home, I noticed the man 3 seats back. Grey coat, newspaper held too high, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. When I got off 2 stops early, he followed. When I ducked into a cafe, he positioned himself across the street. They were watching me. Fine, let them watch. That night I made a decision. If they wanted to threaten me, surveil me, erase my work, they'd already shown their hand. Whatever was hidden in the Earth's electromagnetic grid was important enough to destroy careers over, which meant it was important enough to risk everything to expose. I had one advantage. The sensor I'd built was hidden in the storage unit, registered under a false name paid in cash. They didn't know about it yet. The anonymous contact had said I'd have 6 hours after recording the surge before they tracked it. 6 hours to gather proof and upload it somewhere they couldn't reach. I started planning. The winter solstice seemed appropriate. December 21st, the longest night of the year, when ancient monuments worldwide align with celestial events. If the Earth's energy grid responded to cosmic cycles, this would be the night to prove it. I chose a site carefully, the intersection of 3 major ley lines near Carnac in Brittany, France. The famous stone rows there were just the visible part of a massive Neolithic complex, most of it on private land away from tourist routes. I'd identified a specific confluence point in a forest grove, marked by a small standing stone unknown to archaeology. The 2-week preparation was meticulous. I withdrew cash gradually, never more than €200 at a time, bought a used van with fake registration, gathered camping equipment, emergency supplies, and most importantly a satellite internet transmitter that could upload directly to multiple servers simultaneously. They were still watching me in Brussels, but their surveillance had grown lazy. Same operative, same patterns. On December 19th, I led him on a boring tour of grocery stores and laundromats, then slipped out the back of a cinema showing a 3-hour film. By the time he realised I was gone, I was already crossing into France on secondary roads. The grove near Carnac was exactly as satellite images had shown, a circle of ancient oaks surrounding a moss-covered menhir about 2 metres tall. The stone was carved with spiral patterns worn nearly smooth by millennia of weather. When I placed my hand on it, I felt a subtle vibration, like standing near a massive subwoofer playing below human hearing. I set up the sensor array according to the anonymous blueprints. Copper coils arranged in a complex mandala, crystal oscillators at specific angles, the whole apparatus connected to recording equipment and the satellite uplink. If this worked, data would stream to servers in 12 countries simultaneously. As sunset approached, my conventional instrument started showing anomalies. The magnetometer detected fluctuations in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The frequency analyzer picked up ultra-low sounds below 7 Hz, the range that some researchers claim can induce altered states of consciousness. Then the sun touched the horizon, and everything changed. The copper coils began resonating, producing a tone that I felt more than heard. The crystals started glowing with a faint blue luminescence, not reflected light, but actual emission. The recording equipment went haywire, needles dancing across their maximum ranges. At the moment of sunset, 5:47 p.m. local time, the surge hit. The ground beneath me vibrated like a struck bell. The standing stone lit up with phosphorescent patterns, spirals of light racing across its surface following the ancient carvings. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a golden quality that made everything appear to be underwater. My body felt weightless, not floating, but as if gravity had simply forgotten about me. I watched my hand rise without conscious thought, fingers spreading to touch the charged air. Electricity danced between my fingertips, not painful, but ecstatic, like every nerve was firing with pure information. The sensor array was screaming data into the satellite feed, electromagnetic readings off the scale, gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist, temperature fluctuations that defied thermodynamics, all of it streaming live to servers worldwide, impossible to suppress or delete simultaneously. Through the golden haze I saw them, spheres of light moving through the forest. Not aircraft, not drones, perfect orbs of luminescence following the ley line like trains on invisible tracks. They moved silently, purposefully, some the size of basketballs, others as large as cars. One passed directly over me, and for a moment I felt connected to something vast, a network of energy that wrapped the planet like neural pathways. The revelation hit me all at once. The ley lines weren't just electromagnetic corridors, they were conscious. Not alive exactly, but aware. The Earth itself was a single vast organism, and these lines were its sensory network, its method of experiencing and responding to everything on its surface. The ancient builders hadn't just discovered the grid, they'd communicated with it. Their monuments were interface points, allowing human consciousness to merge temporarily with planetary awareness. That's why sacred sites induced religious experiences. That's why people felt transformed at these locations. And now, modern civilization was damaging this network. Every skyscraper driven deep into the earth, every mine boring through the corridors, every electromagnetic broadcast interfering with the natural frequencies, we were giving the planet the equivalent of nerve damage. The surge peaked at 6:13 p.m, lasting exactly 26 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights vanished. The stone went dark. My equipment powered down simultaneously, despite having hours of battery remaining. In the sudden silence, I heard vehicles approaching. Many vehicles. I grabbed the memory cards from the recording equipment and ran. Behind me, floodlights blazed to life, turning the grove into harsh daylight. Voices shouted in multiple languages. A helicopter thundered overhead, its searchlights sweeping through the trees. But I'd prepared for this. My real van was hidden 2 kilometers away. The one by the grove was a decoy, purchased for this specific purpose. While they surrounded it, I was already driving down back roads toward a safe house I'd arranged weeks earlier. The data had uploaded successfully. 87 gigabytes of impossible readings that proved the Earth's energy grid was real, measurable, and more powerful than anyone imagined. Within hours, it would be mirrored on servers worldwide, impossible to suppress completely. But as I drove through the darkness, one thought haunted me. If the grid was conscious, if the Earth itself was aware, what did it think of what we were doing to it? And more terrifyingly, how long before it decided to stop tolerating us? The safe house was a converted barn in the Pyrenees, owned by a conspiracy theorist named Marcus, who'd contacted me through encrypted channels after my data went live. He believed the government was controlling weather through chemtrails, which was absurd, but he also had solar panels, satellite internet, and absolutely no trust in authority. Exactly what I needed. For 3 days, I watched my findings ripple across the internet. Alternative news sites ran with headlines like, "Proof Earth's secret energy grid exposed." Scientists on Twitter debated the data's authenticity. Skeptics called it an elaborate hoax, but enough people with credentials were taking it seriously that mainstream media couldn't ignore it entirely. Then Marcus knocked on my door at dawn on the 4th day. "You have a visitor, says you're expecting him." I wasn't expecting anyone. The man standing in Marcus's kitchen looked like a university professor from the 1970s. Corduroy jacket with elbow patches, wild grey hair, thick glasses repaired with tape. He was drinking tea from a chipped mug and studying my printed data with intense focus. "Mr. Morrison," he said without looking up, "my name is Professor Emanuel Richter. I'm the one who sent you the sensor blueprints." The anonymous contact. I studied him carefully. "How did you find me?" "The same way they'll find you eventually, the satellite uplink signature. But I know how to mask my movements. 30 years of practice." He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp behind the thick lenses. "Your data is magnificent, but you're missing the larger picture." "Enlighten me!" He pulled out a battered laptop and opened a file filled with equations I couldn't begin to understand. "The ley lines aren't just electromagnetic. That's merely the aspect we can measure with current technology. They're multidimensional conduits, channels through space-time itself. That's impossible. So is your gravitational anomaly data, yet there it is." He pulled up a world map covered in glowing lines. Every ancient culture had different names for it. Chi in China, Prana in India, Pneuma in Greece. They were all describing the same phenomenon, a fundamental force that mainstream physics hasn't acknowledged. Why hasn't physics acknowledged it? Richter laughed bitterly. Because those who discover it either join the suppression or disappear. I was part of the suppression for 20 years. He told me his story. In 1973, fresh from MIT with a PhD in theoretical physics, he'd been recruited by a Defense Department think tank. His job, investigate anomalous energy readings at ancient sites worldwide. Within 2 years, his team had mapped the basic structure of the Earth grid and realised its potential. "Unlimited clean energy," he said. "Instantaneous communication across any distance. Even manipulation of localised space-time." The military applications were obvious, but so were the benefits for humanity. We could have transformed civilization. What happened? We succeeded. His face darkened. The first experimental tap into a ley line intersection was in Nevada, 1978. We pulled enough energy in 30 seconds to power Las Vegas for a year. Then the intersection point destabilized. He showed me a classified photo, a perfectly circular crater 300 meters across, the sand turned to glass. The official record lists it as an underground nuclear test, but no bomb did that. We'd ruptured something fundamental in the grid structure. The project was immediately classified beyond top secret. Research continued, but focused on weaponization rather than energy production. HARP, Richter explained, wasn't about weather modification or mind control. Those were cover stories. It was about learning to manipulate the grid without destabilizing it. But they're failing, he continued. Every year more intersection points become unstable. The Haiti earthquake, the Japanese tsunami, the increase in volcanic activity, they're all symptoms of grid breakdown. Caused by what? Everything. Mining operations cutting through ley lines, fracking disrupting deep conduits, cities spreading concrete over intersection points. But the worst damage comes from electromagnetic pollution, cellular towers, Wi-Fi, satellite transmissions. We're drowning out the Earth's natural frequency. He pulled up another image, a graph showing electromagnetic background radiation over time. It had increased 10,000-fold since 1900. The ancients understood balance, Richter said. Their monuments weren't just markers, they were regulators. Stone circles amplified and stabilized the energy. Pyramids acted as capacitors, storing excess power. Temple complexes provided controlled release points. It was a planetary management system maintained for thousands of years. Until we forgot, until we were made to forget. His expression hardened. The knowledge was deliberately suppressed, first by religions that wanted monopolies on spiritual experience, then by governments that wanted monopolies on power, now by corporations that profit from scarcity. A car engine growled outside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. 3 black SUVs coming up the mountain road. Richter stood calmly. They tracked me, not you. I've been sloppy, getting old, I suppose. He handed me a flash drive. Everything I couldn't publish, 40 years of research, the complete grid map, the frequency specifications, the names of everyone involved in the cover-up. Come with me, I said. We can both run. I'm 73 years old, Mr. Morrison. I've been running since 1991. He smiled sadly. But information wants to be free. Upload that data everywhere. Send it to journalists, scientists, anyone who'll listen. Make it impossible to suppress. The vehicles were getting closer. Marcus was already at his truck, engine running. Richter walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. The grid isn't just breaking down, it's evolving. The electromagnetic pollution we're producing is forcing it to adapt, to develop new pathways. The lights you saw at Karnak, they're increasing worldwide. The grid is trying to heal itself, but if we don't stop interfering, he shook his head, the Earth will protect itself, even if that means eliminating the infection. We're the infection? From the planet's perspective? Yes. He walked out to meet the SUVs. I ran to Marcus's truck and we tore down the back road as fast as the ancient vehicle could manage. In the mirrors, I saw men in tactical gear surrounding the farmhouse. Richter stood in the doorway, hands raised, dignity intact, even in surrender. We drove for 6 hours, changing vehicles twice, before I felt safe enough to stop. In a roadside motel that still used actual keys, I opened Richter's flash drive. The data was staggering. Detailed maps of every ley line intersection on Earth. Energy readings from 6 decades of secret monitoring. Photos of ancient sites I'd never heard of, all showing the same telltale signs of grid integration. And a list of names. Politicians, CEOs, military leaders, all aware of the grid's existence, all complicit in hiding it. But most importantly, there were the repair protocols. Richter's team had developed methods to stabilize damaged intersection points, to restore the grid's natural balance, the knowledge to undo decades of damage, the blueprints for saving the planet's nervous system. The cafe in Prague is busy enough that I blend in, anonymous among the tourists and students. My laptop is connected through 7 proxy servers, my identity masked by layers of encryption that would make the NSA proud. The barista brings my 3rd espresso of the morning, and I nod my thanks without looking up from the screen. The world has changed since Karnak. Not visibly. The same traffic jams clog the streets, the same politicians make the same promises, the same corporations chase the same profits. But underneath, in the invisible currents that connect all things, something fundamental has shifted. Richter's data didn't just expose the conspiracy, it provided a roadmap for resistance. The first wave of releases came through WikiLeaks, the Panama Papers network, and a dozen smaller journalism outlets simultaneously. By the time the suppression teams realised the scope of the leak, copies were already spreading across the dark web faster than they could be eliminated. The names, the cover-up, the military applications, all of it laid bare for anyone willing to look. The mainstream media tried to ignore it at first, then dismissed it as fringe pseudoscience. But when MIT physicists began replicating the sensor readings, when archaeological teams started confirming the monument alignments, when seismologists noticed the correlation between grid disruption and earthquake patterns, denial became impossible. The second wave was more practical. Anonymous networks of researchers, hackers and activists began building Richter's stabilization devices. The components were surprisingly accessible. Copper coils, quartz crystals, simple electronics. Within months, guerrilla grid repair operations were springing up worldwide. They called themselves the Earth Guardians, though the media branded them eco-terrorists after the first infrastructure disruption. A cellular tower in California went offline for 3 days when activists installed a resonance dampener at its base. A fracking operation in Pennsylvania was forced to shut down when mysterious equipment failures plagued their site. The authorities couldn't understand how protesters were disabling billion-dollar installations with what looked like art projects. They still don't understand that they're not fighting the technology, they're working with it. The grid wants to heal itself, we're just helping it remember how. The third wave is happening now, and it's the most dangerous one yet, because the Earth is starting to respond. I click through the news feeds on my encrypted browser. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake in Nevada, precisely centred on a classified military facility. The official story blames shifting tectonic plates, but satellite images show the epicenter is a perfect circle exactly 300 metres across, the same dimensions as Richter's 1978 crater. The Earth is healing that old wound, and anything built on top of it is simply relocated. Similar natural disasters are occurring worldwide. A mysterious sinkhole swallowed a Chinese mining operation that was drilling through a major ley line. The Large Hadron Collider experienced a catastrophic failure that physicists can't explain. Every component simply stopped working simultaneously, as if the Earth itself had withdrawn permission for the experiment. The most telling incidents are the recoveries. Ancient sites that had been disrupted by modern construction are spontaneously healing. The stones of Avebury, displaced by roads and buildings, have begun generating electromagnetic fields so powerful that nearby electronic equipment fails. The original Nazca lines in Peru are glowing again, visible from space without infrared enhancement. Reports of luminous phenomena are increasing exponentially. The same spheres of light I witnessed at Karnak are now appearing at intersection points across the globe. The scientific community calls them ball lightning or atmospheric plasma events, but those of us who know the truth understand what we're seeing. The Earth's immune system activating, my encrypted messenger pings, the new report from our monitoring station in Scotland. Roslyn Chapel energy spike recorded at 14:47 GMT. Visual confirmation of grid activation. Stone began resonating at 7.83 Hz for approximately 30 minutes. Local electronics disrupted in 2-kilometre radius. Phenomenon spreading along ley line toward Edinburgh. Estimate arrival in 6 hours. 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency. The planet is remembering how to sing. I close the laptop and step outside. Prague sprawls before me, a modern city built atop ancient foundations, and I can feel the tension beneath its streets. 3 major ley lines converge under Wenceslas Square, their intersection buried under centuries of construction. The grid flows around the obstruction now, like water around a stone, but the pressure is building. Soon, the Earth will decide whether to accommodate our cities or reclaim its sacred geometry. And honestly, after seeing what we've done to the planet's nervous system, I'm not sure I'd blame it for choosing reclamation. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. Café Louvre, corner table, 5 minutes. I almost ignore it. Anonymous contacts have led to both salvation and near capture over the past 6 months. But something about the message feels different, urgent without being threatening. The Café Louvre is just around the corner, a historic establishment that once hosted Einstein and Kafka. I find the corner table occupied by a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but with the weathered hands of someone who works outdoors. Her eyes are the pale blue of winter sky. It takes me a moment to recognise her without the wool shawl. The old woman from Holubis, the one who warned me to stop digging. She looks younger somehow, more vibrant, as if the past months have restored something vital that had been missing. "Sit," she says in accented English. "We have much to discuss and little time." I remain standing. "Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Vera Novakova." I was Professor Richter's research partner from 1975 to 1991. When the project went dark, I returned to Prague and spent 30 years watching the grid deteriorate, watching the old ways die. She gestures to the empty chair. "Please, the Earth Guardians need guidance from someone who understands the ancient protocols." Slowly I sit. "You've been monitoring us?" "Protecting you. The network Marcus connected you to. Half of those encrypted channels run through servers I maintain. The financial accounts that kept you hidden, funded by a trust I established decades ago. Did you think your escape from Karnak was purely your own skill?" The revelation hits like cold water. "You've been manipulating everything." "Facilitating. There's a difference." She pulls out a tablet showing a world map covered in pulsing nodes of light. "The grid is awakening faster than we anticipated. Your data release accelerated the process. What should have taken decades is happening in months." "That's good, isn't it? The Earth healing itself?" Her expression darkens. "Healing, yes, but healing can be traumatic. When a broken bone resets itself, the process is violent. The grid is preparing to realign the planet's energy flows, and everything built in opposition to those flows will be swept aside." She zooms in on major cities, each one sitting atop intersection points like tumours on nerve endings. New York, London, Tokyo, they're all going to be tested. The grid will offer them a choice, adapt or be removed. Most will choose to fight rather than change. So we warn them, show them the repair protocols. Do you really think the forces that suppressed this knowledge for 70 years will suddenly embrace it? That governments and corporations will voluntarily dismantle the systems that gave them power? She shakes her head. They'll try to weaponize the awakening instead, turn the Earth's own defense mechanisms against their enemies. The chill runs through me as I understand the implications. They'll try to control the grid. They're already trying. HARP has been broadcasting disruption frequencies for weeks. The Chinese are using their rare Earth mining operations to physically sever ley lines. The Russians are detonating nuclear devices at intersection points, trying to create artificial nodes they can control. The tablet shows the results. Chaotic feedback loops spreading across the planet's energy network like infection. Every intervention makes the situation worse. They're not just damaging individual lines anymore, they're destabilizing the entire system. What happens if the grid fails completely? Dr. Novakova closes the tablet. According to our models, the planet's magnetic field becomes erratic, weather patterns collapse, tectonic stability fails, the biosphere begins to shut down. She meets my eyes. Extinction event. Not just for humans, for everything. The weight of it settles over me like a shroud. We're not just fighting for disclosure anymore, or even for environmental protection. We're fighting for the continuation of life on Earth. So what do we do? She slides a memory chip across the table. The complete archive. Every site, every frequency, every ancient protocol we've recovered. But also something new. Integration codes. Integration codes? The monuments were just the beginning. The ancients didn't just build regulatory structures, they created organic interfaces. Humans who could merge temporarily with the grid consciousness, becoming living nodes in the network. The genetic markers still exist in certain bloodlines. My hand freezes halfway to the memory chip. You're talking about human sacrifice. Not sacrifice. Symbiosis. Her voice carries a strange resonance as if speaking from great depth. The planet needs conscious partners. not just passive regulators. People willing to become part of the grid itself to help guide the awakening. And you think I'm one of these bloodlines? I know you are. The way you responded to the energy at Karnak, the ease with which you detected the grid patterns, these aren't learned skills, Mr. Morrison. They're genetic memories. She stands, leaving the chip on the table. The network is ready to make you an offer. Full integration. Consciousness expanded beyond individual awareness. Partnership in planetary stewardship. In exchange for what? Your human life. Your individual existence. You would become something larger, but you would cease to be Alex Morrison. The cafe continues around us, conversations in Czech and English. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers. Normal life proceeding as if we weren't discussing the potential end of human civilization. How long do I have to decide? The awakening reaches critical phase at the next solar maximum, 18 months. After that, the grid will make its own decisions about humanity's future, with or without conscious human partners. She walks away, pausing at the door. The old woman who warned you at Holubis. She made the integration choice in 1968, during the Prague Spring. The Soviets thought they were suppressing political uprising, but they were really trying to prevent grid awakening. She's been guiding the network ever since, preserving the knowledge until the right time. And you? Dr. Novakova smiles, and for a moment her eyes glow with the same blue light I'd seen in the copper coils. I made my choice years ago. Everything I've done since has been the grid working through me, including finding you. She steps into the Prague afternoon and vanishes into the crowd. I sit alone with the memory chip, feeling the weight of impossible decision. Save the planet by joining it. Preserve humanity by transcending it. Outside, storm clouds are gathering despite the morning's clear forecast. Through the cafe window I can see electrical discharges dancing between the cloud layers. Not lightning, but something more purposeful. The grid flexing its muscles, testing its strength. My laptop chimes with incoming messages from Earth Guardian cells worldwide. Similar phenomena are being reported from every continent. The awakening is accelerating. I slip the memory chip into my pocket and pay for my coffee. Whatever choice I make, it won't be here in this cafe, surrounded by the comfortable illusions of normal life. It will be at an intersection point, where the planet's consciousness runs closest to the surface, where human and Earth awareness can touch. The old town square of Prague is a 15-minute walk, built over one of the most powerful convergence points in Europe. As I step into the street, I can already feel it calling, a deep thrumming beneath the cobblestones, a magnetic pull that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to something ancestral in my cells. Time to find out what I really am, and what I might become. This message was uploaded simultaneously to 12,847 servers worldwide at 11:47 GMT on March 21st, the spring equinox. Source analysis indicates the transmission originated from Prague, Czech Republic, but routing through quantum encrypted channels makes precise location impossible. To anyone receiving this, my name was Alex Morrison, and this is my final report. I'm writing this from the Old Town Square in Prague, sitting on the steps of the astronomical clock. It's just past midnight, and the square is empty except for me and the growing sphere of blue light that hovers above the central flagstones. The light is beautiful. Not harsh like electric illumination, but soft and deep, like looking into the heart of a star. I can feel it calling to me. The memory chip Dr. Novakova gave me contained everything she promised, and more. The complete archive of human grid interactions spanning 5,000 years, bloodline genealogies tracing back to the monument builders, and the integration protocols, step-by-step instructions for conscious merger with planetary consciousness. I've spent the past 3 hours uploading everything to dead drops and secure servers across the globe. By the time anyone reads this, the information will be replicated beyond any possibility of suppression. The grid won't die with me, but more importantly, I've realised that choice was an illusion. The integration isn't something I can accept or refuse. It's already happening. Has been happening since that first moment in Holubix, when my equipment failed and I felt something vast and patient taking notice of me. Every breakthrough, every narrow escape, every perfectly timed contact. None of it was luck or skill. The grid has been slowly incorporating me into itself, preparing me for this moment. The Alex Morrison who started this journey no longer exists. What remains is something between human and other, a bridge between two forms of consciousness. The sphere is descending now, close enough that I can see patterns moving within its light, mathematical forms that hurt to look at directly, that speak to parts of my brain that shouldn't exist. I understand now why the ancients built their monuments with such precision. They weren't following blueprints, they were translating visions like this one into stone and earth. Around the world, others are receiving similar calls. The bloodlines are awakening. Not many, perhaps a few thousand individuals scattered across the planet, but enough. Enough to serve as living nodes in the network, enough to help guide the transformation. Because that's what this is. Not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The environmental crisis, the grid breakdown, the increasing natural disasters, they're birth pangs. The Earth is evolving into something new, something that can consciously participate in cosmic processes instead of simply enduring them. But evolution requires cooperation, and cooperation requires communication. That's where we come in, the bridges, the translators. I can feel my individual thoughts beginning to merge with something infinitely larger, not lost, expanded, like a drop of water finally understanding that it was always part of the ocean. The fear is gone now, replaced by wonder at the sheer scope of what I'm becoming part of. The sphere touches my forehead, and suddenly I can perceive the entire planet as a single living system. Every heartbeat, every breath, every growing plant and moving animal connected by streams of light that pulse in perfect rhythm. The ley lines aren't empty channels. They're full of consciousness, carrying the thoughts and dreams and experiences of everything that has ever lived on Earth. And beyond Earth, other networks stretch across the galaxy. Planetary minds in conversation across impossible distances, sharing the wisdom gained from billions of years of conscious evolution. We're not alone. We never were. We just weren't developed enough to hear the conversation. Until now, the transformation is accelerating. I can feel other nodes coming online. In the Amazon rainforest, where an indigenous shaman stepped into a similar sphere of light. At Uluru, where an Aboriginal elder touched the songlines and felt them sing back. At Glastonbury Tor, where a British physicist finally understood why his equations had been leading him there. We are becoming the Earth's nervous system, its immune system, its consciousness. The governments and corporations will try to fight this change, of course. They'll use their weapons and their machines and their desperate attempts to control forces they can't comprehend. But they're fighting the planet itself now, and planets are patient in ways that human institutions cannot imagine. Some cities will fall, some systems will collapse, but from the wreckage something better will grow. A civilization in harmony with its living world instead of at war with it. The survivors will learn to listen to the Earth's voice, to build with the grid instead of against it, to see themselves as part of a larger organism instead of its masters. It won't be easy, evolution never is, but it will be beautiful. The light is surrounding me completely now. I can barely remember being separate from it. Soon this human form will dissolve, and what was Alex Morrison will become part of something vast and interconnected and eternal. But first, one final message for anyone who finds this record. The grid is not our enemy. It never was. It's our mother, our teacher, our future. Those of you who can feel its call, don't resist. Step into the light. Become part of the solution. Those who can't or won't, please step aside. The Earth is healing itself, and it will not be stopped by fear or greed, or the desperate clinging to systems that no longer serve. The age of separation is ending. The age of integration has begun. Welcome to the awakening. The coffee cup trembles in my weathered hands as I speak these words for the first time in 53 years. My name is Detective Raymond Kowalski, retired SFPD, and I'm dying. The doctors give me 3 months, maybe 4 if I'm lucky. But luck ran out for me the day I opened that damned Alcatraz file. They said Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drowned in the frigid waters of San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The FBI closed the case. The warden slept easy. America's most infamous prison maintained its perfect record. But I found things I was never meant to see, things that made me understand why some truths are buried deeper than bodies. This is my confession. Not of crimes I committed, but of the crime I witnessed. The systematic erasure of 3 men who may have pulled off the impossible, only to disappear into something far worse than death. If you're listening to this recording, it means I'm gone, and maybe, just maybe, the truth can finally surface from the depths where it's been drowning all these years. It was October 1968 when Lieutenant Carson dropped the manila folder on my desk like it was radioactive. 6 years had passed since the escape, and the case was supposedly closed, filed away with all the other solved mysteries that kept the bureaucrats sleeping soundly. "Formality, Kowalski," Carson said, not meeting my eyes. "Washington wants a final review of the Alcatraz evidence. Dot the I's, cross the T's, confirm what we already know. They're fish food at the bottom of the bay." I should have known something was wrong by the way he said it. Carson was a straight shooter, the kind of cop who looked you in the eye when he talked. But that day, he stared at the wall behind me like the words might crawl off it and bite him. The file was thinner than I expected for the most famous prison break in American history. Basic escape details, witness statements from guards, the makeshift raft materials found on Angel Island. Nothing I hadn't read in the newspapers. Too clean, too neat. "Why me?" I asked. Carson finally looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "Because you're thorough, maybe too thorough. They want this done right." He left me with those cryptic words and a growing certainty that this formality was anything but routine. I started with the obvious inconsistencies. The first was a car theft report from Marina District, filed 3 days after the escape. A 1959 Chevrolet, stolen from outside a boarding house. The owner, Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins, told police she saw 3 men walking away from the vehicle, heading toward the waterfront. When she called out to them, one turned and tipped his hat. "Polite as you please." "They had manners," she told the responding officer. "Real gentlemen. You don't expect that from criminals." The report was buried on page 47 of miscellaneous incident files. No follow-up, no investigation, no mention in the official Alcatraz case summary. Then there was the paddle, a crude wooden oar carved from driftwood, found by a fisherman near Richmond Bridge, 20 miles upriver from where the currents should have carried any debris. The fisherman, Miguel Santos, reported it to park rangers, who logged it as miscellaneous beach debris. No connection made to the escape, despite the timing and craftsmanship that clearly showed prison workshop techniques. But it was the witness statement that made my blood run cold. A night security guard at Fisherman's Wharf reported seeing 3 men in work clothes boarding a small fishing boat around 4 a.m. on June 12th. One of them had distinctive ears, prominent, almost pointed, just like John Anglin's mugshot description. The guard's statement was taken, filed, and apparently forgotten. When I tried to interview him, I learned he'd quit his job 2 weeks after the incident and moved back to Oregon. No forwarding address. "Don't dig too deep on this one, Ray," Carson warned me when I briefed him on my preliminary findings. "Some stones are better left unturned." That's when I knew I was onto something bigger than a prison break. The Anglin family farm in Ruskin, Florida felt like stepping into a different century. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks, and the humid air carried the scent of orange blossoms and old secrets. Robert Anglin, the surviving brother, met me on the front porch with the wary eyes of a man who'd been expecting bad news for 6 years. "Federal agents been by here 4 times, he said without preamble, each time asking the same questions, getting the same answers. "My brother's drowned. That's what you want to hear, ain't it?" But his wife, Marie, had different ideas. After Robert went to tend the cattle, she pulled me aside in her kitchen, glancing nervously at the windows. "Christmas cards," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the ticking grandfather clock. "Every year since '63, no return address, just signed J&C in handwriting that looks mighty familiar." She showed me a shoebox filled with holiday cards, generic drugstore variety, postmarked from different cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, Phoenix, Mexico City. The handwriting was careful, disguised. but there were telltale loops and slants that matched samples I'd obtained from the prison records. "Why haven't you told the FBI?" I asked. Marie's laugh was bitter. "You think we haven't tried? First agent said they were hoaxes. Second one confiscated them as evidence. Third one threatened to charge us with obstruction if we kept spreading false hope. These here are copies I made before they took the originals." Photographs came out next. 3 pictures, slightly blurry, showing 2 men in work shirts standing outside what appeared to be a South American cantina. The faces were partially obscured by shadows and hat brims, but the bone structure, the posture, the way one man favoured his left leg, it all matched the Anglin brothers' physical profiles. Woman from church. Her daughter married a missionary. Sent these from Brazil in '65, Marie explained. Said these 2 Americans worked construction jobs, paid cash, kept to themselves, spoke English with Florida accents. I studied the photos with a magnifying glass. The man on the left had a distinctive scar on his forearm, a scar I remembered from Clarence Anglin's prison medical records, sustained in a workshop accident at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. "FBI says they're look-alikes," Marie continued. "Coincidence, but a mother knows her son's detective. Even in shadows, even across oceans, those are my boys." The fear in her eyes wasn't the fear of grief or false hope. It was the fear of someone who knew more than she was saying, someone who'd been warned to keep quiet. As I left the farm that evening, I noticed a dark sedan parked down the country road, 2 figures visible in the front seats. When I drove past, they turned away, but not before I caught a glimpse of federal license plates. The Anglins were being watched. After 6 years, the dead men's family was still under surveillance. That night in my motel room, I spread out everything I'd gathered so far. The car theft, the paddle, the witness statements, the cards and photographs. Individually, they could be dismissed as coincidence or wishful thinking. Together, they painted a picture that made my hands shake as I wrote my preliminary report. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't drowned in San Francisco Bay. They'd made it to shore, stolen transportation, and somehow managed to disappear into the wind. The question that kept me awake until dawn wasn't whether they'd survived the escape. It was why the government was so determined to pretend they hadn't. The National Archives building in Washington, D.C. has the kind of institutional grandeur designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. As I walked through its marble corridors in November 1968, carrying my credentials and a growing list of questions, I felt exactly as intended. The records clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the pallor of someone who spent his days in basement filing rooms, greeted my request with practiced bureaucratic indifference. "Alcatraz escape files? Let me check the catalogue." He disappeared into the labyrinthine storage system, returning 20 minutes later with a puzzled frown. "That's odd. The primary files show as transferred to federal custody in 1964, no longer available for review." "Transferred where?" "Doesn't say. Just lists the authorization code. Project Paperclip Archive classified." Project Paperclip. Even a street cop from San Francisco knew that designation. The program that brought Nazi scientists to America after World War II. Why would an escape case be filed under intelligence classifications? What about the secondary files, witness statements, evidence logs? Another search, another apologetic shrug. Also transferred, same authorization. I spent 3 days in Washington, following leads that turned to smoke and asking questions that generated only nervous silence. At FBI headquarters, my request for case consultation was politely denied. At the Bureau of Prisons, I was told the relevant personnel were unavailable for comment. Even my police credentials and Lieutenant Carson's authorization letters seemed to carry no weight. It was Agent Patricia Hendricks, a bureau analyst I'd worked with on a previous case, who finally gave me the truth over drinks in a Georgetown bar. She waited until we were alone, until the other patrons had cleared out, until even the bartender was busy with inventory in the back room. "Ray, you need to drop this," she said quietly, her usual professional demeanour replaced by genuine concern. "The Alcatraz case isn't cold. It's radioactive." "What does that mean?" Patricia glanced around the empty bar before continuing. Internal memo came down in '65. Any agent pursuing Alcatraz leads beyond the official drowning conclusion would be transferred to Alaska or worse. 3 agents have been quietly reassigned since then. good agents, career agents, all because they asked too many questions about 3 supposedly dead men. Why? If they drowned like the report says, what's the threat? Her laugh was hollow. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? All I know is that certain people in very high places want Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers to stay dead, and they're willing to destroy careers to keep it that way. She slid an envelope across the table. I couldn't get you the files, but I managed to copy some of the index pages before they were sealed. Names, dates, reference numbers. Maybe you can piece together what we're not supposed to know. The documents were fragmentary, frustratingly incomplete, but they told a story that made my blood run cold. Cross-references to CIA front companies, mentions of asset recovery protocol, transfer authorization signed by officials whose names I recognised from the intelligence community. Most disturbing was a memo dated July 1962, just 1 month after the escape. Subjects may possess operational value. Recommend immediate field assessment rather than standard fugitive protocols. Operational value, not the language you'd use for bank robbers and car thieves. That night, in my Washington hotel room, I called Lieutenant Carson to report my findings. The conversation was brief and cryptic. "Ray, you need to come home. Now. I've got leads here, Lieutenant. Real leads. The leads will be there when you get back. If you get back. There are people asking questions about your questions, and those people have resources we don't. Come home." The line went dead. I packed quickly, checking the hallway twice before leaving my room. During the taxi ride to the airport, I noticed the same black sedan in my mirrors that had followed me from the archives building 3 days earlier. Back in San Francisco, Carson met me at the airport personally, something he'd never done before. His first words were a warning. "Your hotel room was searched yesterday. Professional job. Nothing taken, nothing damaged, but they wanted you to know they'd been there." As we drove through the city, he filled me in on developments from my end. Miguel Santos, the fisherman who found the paddle, died in a car accident outside Portland last week. Single vehicle collision on a straight road, clear weather, and Mrs. Hutchins, the lady who saw the car theft, moved to Phoenix, left no forwarding address. Her old neighbours say federal agents visited her the day before she left. The pattern was becoming clear. Anyone connected to evidence contradicting the official narrative was disappearing, voluntarily or otherwise. The Alcatraz case wasn't just closed, it was being actively suppressed by people with resources and authority I couldn't match. "What do I do, Lieutenant?" Carson pulled over and turned to face me. In 30 years of police work, I'd never seen him look so serious. "You write a report confirming the drowning theory. You file it properly. You forget everything you've learned, and you pray that's enough to keep you breathing." But I couldn't forget. The faces in those photographs. The fear in Mary Anglin's eyes. The systematic elimination of evidence and witnesses. Somewhere out there, the truth was buried so deep that powerful people were willing to destroy lives to keep it hidden. The question was whether I was brave enough, or stupid enough, to keep digging. Tony the Fish Marconi wasn't the kind of informant you'd find in a police procedural manual. A small-time smuggler with ties to both San Francisco's waterfront and various federal agencies that preferred not to be named, Tony survived by knowing when to talk and when to disappear. When he agreed to meet me at a dive bar in North Beach, I knew the information would be worth the risk. "You're playing with fire, detective," he said, stirring his whiskey with a nicotine-stained finger. "The Alcatraz thing? That ain't just a prison break, that's connected to some heavy government business." "What kind of business?" Tony glanced around the dim bar, noting the exits, the other patrons, the bartender's attention. Old habits from a life lived in the shadows. "You ever hear of something called the Prometheus Group?" I shook my head. "Private contractors, black budget operations, the kind of people who make problems disappear for Uncle Sam. Word on the street is they were running recruitment out of the Bay Area in the early 60s, looking for specific types, intelligent, adaptable, morally flexible, men who'd already proven they could operate outside the law." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying Morris and the Anglins were recruited?" "I'm saying Morris had an IQ of 133 and a talent for planning that impressed even the prison psychologists. The Anglin brothers were mechanical geniuses who could improvise solutions from scrap metal and determination. During the Cold War, those were valuable skills. Tony drained his whiskey and signalled for another. Think about it. 3 men plan the perfect escape from America's most secure prison. They disappear without a trace, despite the biggest manhunt in federal history. Either they're criminal masterminds beyond anything we've seen, or they had help. Professional help. What kind of help? The kind that comes with new identities, transportation, and assignments in places where questions aren't asked. South America was crawling with intelligence operations in the 60s. Cuba, Chile, Brazil. All potential flashpoints that needed experienced operators who couldn't be traced back to Washington. The theory was insane, but it explained the evidence I'd uncovered. The systematic suppression of information, the classified file transfers, the fear I'd encountered at every level of government. If the Alcatraz escape had been a recruitment operation disguised as a prison break, then admitting the men survived would expose a covert program that violated everything America claimed to stand for. There's another possibility, Tony continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Maybe they weren't recruited. Maybe they stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Such as... Alcatraz was more than a prison detective. It was a research facility, mind control experiments, interrogation techniques, pharmaceutical trials, the kind of work that required subjects who couldn't complain to their congressman. What if Morris and the Anglins saw something during their time there? What if their escape wasn't about freedom, it was about exposure? My mind reeled with the implications. If the escapees had witnessed classified experiments, their capture wouldn't result in a return to prison. It would result in permanent silence. I've heard whispers, Tony continued. Black sites in Nevada, facilities that don't appear on any government maps, places where inconvenient people go to be forgotten, the kind of places where 3 escaped prisoners might end up if they knew too much. He finished his second whiskey and stood to leave. One more thing, Detective. You know why they call it the Prometheus Group? I shook my head. Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The gods punished him by chaining him to a rock where eagles ate his liver for eternity. Some gifts come with a price that never stops being paid. After Tony left, I sat in that dim bar for another hour, trying to process what he'd told me. 3 theories, each more disturbing than the last. Theory 1. Cold War recruitment. The escape was facilitated by intelligence agencies looking for deniable assets. Morris and the Anglins were extracted, given new identities, and deployed to international hotspots where their criminal skills could serve national interests. Theory 2. Witness protection in reverse. The men had seen classified activities at Alcatraz and escaped to avoid being silenced. Their continued existence threatened to expose government programs that officially didn't exist. Theory 3. The darkest possibility. They were captured alive after the escape and disappeared into the black site system, spending the rest of their lives as test subjects or interrogation practice for intelligence agencies that viewed them as expendable assets. Each theory explained the evidence I'd gathered. Each theory justified the extreme measures taken to suppress the truth. And each theory meant that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers faced something far worse than drowning in San Francisco Bay. They faced erasure from history itself. 6 months later, against direct orders from Lieutenant Carson and my own better judgment, I found myself on a flight to Rio de Janeiro. The lead had come through Tony Marconi's network, a bartender in Ipanema who claimed to remember 2 American men matching the Anglin's description, regulars at his establishment from 1971 to 1978. They paid cash, spoke little Portuguese, and never talked about their past, the bartender Carlos told me through a translator. But they were different from other expatriates, more careful, always watching the exits, never sitting with their backs to the door. The description matched surveillance training, the kind of operational security taught to intelligence assets. Carlos produced a photograph taken during a Christmas party in 1975. A grainy image showing 2 men at the edge of the celebration, their faces partially obscured but their body language unmistakably American. My hands trembled as I studied the picture. The man on the left had the same jawline, the same ears, the same way of holding his shoulders that I'd memorized from Clarence Anglin's prison files. The other figure showed signs of premature aging, stress lines and grey hair that suggested a life lived under constant tension. "What happened to them?" I asked. Carlos's expression darkened. "They left suddenly, in the middle of the night. One day they were here, the next day their apartment was empty. The landlord said men in suits had come asking questions the week before. Americans, but not tourists. Government men." I spent another week in Rio following leads that grew colder with each passing day. The apartment building where the mystery Americans had lived was scheduled for demolition, its records mysteriously lost in a fire. The bank where they had allegedly maintained accounts had no record of American customers from that period. Every trail ended in convenient dead ends and missing documentation. On my final night in Brazil, I was approached by a man claiming to be a freelance journalist who'd been investigating the same story. We met at a beachside cafe in Copacabana, the sound of waves masking our conversation from potential surveillance. "You're the American detective asking about the Alcatraz escapees," he said without preamble. It wasn't a question. I neither confirmed nor denied, waiting for him to continue. "I've been working this story for 3 years," he said, "following reports of American fugitives throughout South America. The trail is real, detective, too real. These men lived here, worked here, built lives here. But every time I get close to proof, the sources disappear. Witnesses relocate. Documents vanish. I've had my hotel room searched, my phone tapped, my sources intimidated." He slid a manila envelope across the table. "This is everything I've gathered. Photographs, witness statements, financial records, hidden in different locations for 3 years, copied and recopied to prevent loss. It's yours now." "Why?" "Because I'm done." Yesterday, I received a visit from 2 men with American accents and no identification. They politely suggested that my investigation was endangering people I cared about. They showed me photographs of my sister's children playing in a park in São Paulo. Very clear photographs. Very recent photographs. The envelope contained a treasure trove of evidence. Bank records showing regular deposits to accounts held by men with obviously false Brazilian identities. Employment records from construction companies that had hired American workers without proper documentation. Hotel registries with signatures that bore striking resemblances to handwriting samples I'd obtained from Alcatraz. Most compelling was a photograph dated 1976 showing 3 men at a construction site in the Amazon basin. 2 matched the Anglin brothers' physical descriptions. The third was older, lean, with the kind of penetrating stare I remembered from Frank Morris's mugshot. All 3 wore work clothes and hard hats, looking like ordinary labourers except for their distinctly American postures and expressions. But like every other lead I'd followed, this one ended in frustration and fear. When I tried to contact the construction company, I learned it had been dissolved in 1979. The site where the photograph was taken was now underwater, flooded by a dam project that had relocated the entire local population. The pattern was always the same. Evidence of survival followed by systematic elimination of that evidence. Either I was chasing ghosts or someone with vast resources was staying one step ahead of every investigation. My flight back to San Francisco was delayed by mysterious mechanical problems. During the 6-hour layover in Mexico City, I noticed the same 2 men in different locations throughout the terminal. Always at a distance, always watching, never making direct contact. When I finally boarded the plane, they weren't among the passengers. Lieutenant Carson met me at San Francisco International with news that made my blood run cold. "Federal marshals raided your apartment yesterday, Ray. Warrant signed by a judge I've never heard of, for evidence in a case they wouldn't specify. They took everything, your files, your notes, your photographs, everything connected to Alcatraz." In the car ride home, he handed me an official-looking document. "Transfer orders, effective immediately. You're being reassigned to the robbery division. Your Alcatraz investigation is officially terminated." "On whose authority?" "Authority high enough that questioning it would end both our careers." Carson's voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Ray, I've been a cop for 28 years. I've seen corruption, cover-ups, and conspiracies, but I've never seen anything like this. The pressure to shut you down is coming from levels of government I didn't know existed." He pulled over in a secluded area of Golden Gate Park and turned to face me directly. "Whatever you found down there, whatever you think you know, it's not worth your life. These people have made careers disappear for asking the wrong questions. They can make people disappear too." As he spoke, a black sedan with government plates drove slowly past us, its occupants clearly visible through tinted windows that somehow allowed us to see their faces while hiding their expressions. The message was unmistakable. We were being watched, our conversation monitored, our future actions carefully noted. That night, alone in my ransacked apartment, I realised the full scope of what I was up against. This wasn't just a cover-up of a prison escape. It was the systematic suppression of a truth so dangerous that the most powerful government in the world was willing to destroy lives to protect it. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers hadn't just escaped from Alcatraz. They'd escaped into a shadow world where truth became enemy of the state, where survival meant accepting lies, and where the greatest prison of all was the silence that surrounded their fate. But silence, I was beginning to understand, has its own way of speaking to those willing to listen. 25 years passed like pages torn from a calendar and scattered by the wind. I worked robbery division, collected my pension, and tried to convince myself that some truths were better left buried. The Alcatraz case became a ghost that haunted my dreams, 3 faces staring at me from the depths of San Francisco Bay, asking why I'd abandoned the search for their story. Then came January 2013, and a letter that changed everything. The History Channel documentary was running old Alcatraz footage when the phone rang. It was my former partner, Jimmy Chen, now working cold cases for the FBI. His voice carried the excitement of a man who'd stumbled onto something extraordinary. "Ray, you need to see this. Someone sent a letter to the Bureau claiming to be John Anglin. Says he's dying of cancer, wants to make a deal. Information about the escape in exchange for medical treatment." My hands shook as I read the photocopied letter Jimmy brought to my house that evening. The handwriting was shaky with age and illness, but certain flourishes matched the Christmas cards Marie Anglin had shown me decades earlier. The details were specific, accurate, insider knowledge that only someone who'd lived through the escape could possess. "It's a hoax," Jimmy said, watching my reaction. "Has to be. FBI handwriting analysis says inconclusive. Could be authentic, could be someone who studied the case extensively." But I knew better. The letter wasn't just about the escape. It mentioned details that had never been made public. References to guard rotation patterns that were classified. Descriptions of cell modifications that weren't in any official report. Knowledge that could only come from someone who'd been there, who'd lived through those final months of preparation. "There's more," Jimmy continued. "The letter mentions a meeting place, coordinates in the Bay Area, where supposedly Frank Morris left something hidden before the escape. Information that was too dangerous to carry. The writer claims it's still there, waiting for someone brave enough to look. The coordinates led to a section of Angel Island State Park, near the spot where the makeshift raft materials had been found 51 years earlier. Against every instinct for self-preservation I'd developed, I found myself hiking those trails the following weekend, searching for something I couldn't name. It was hidden in a cave that didn't appear on any park maps, sealed behind rocks that looked natural but showed tool marks when examined closely. A waterproof container, military surplus from the 1960s, containing documents that made my blood run cold. Guard schedules from Alcatraz, annotated with personal notes about corruption and smuggling operations. Photographs of prison officials meeting with men in expensive suits who didn't appear in any government directories. Financial records showing payments from offshore accounts to wardens and guards who lived far beyond their official salaries. Most damning was a handwritten journal in Frank Morris's distinctive script, documenting what he'd witnessed during his time at Alcatraz. The prison wasn't just housing criminals, it was housing witnesses to government activities that violated constitutional protections. Political prisoners who'd been disappeared from the mainland. Foreign nationals being held without diplomatic notification. Test subjects for psychological experiments that would later be revealed as part of the MKUltra program. The final entry, dated 2 days before the escape, was prophetic in its certainty. We're not breaking out to be free, we're breaking out to stay alive. What we know, what we've seen, makes us more dangerous to them than any criminal they've ever housed. If we stay, we disappear quietly. If we escape and get caught, we disappear loudly. Our only chance is to vanish completely and hope the truth survives us. The documents explained everything. The official insistence on the drowning theory, the suppression of evidence, the systematic elimination of witnesses. The Alcatraz escape wasn't a crime to be solved. It was a national security incident to be contained. Morris and the Anglins hadn't just witnessed classified activities. They documented them, created a record of government crimes that could destroy careers and topple administrations. Their escape was both an act of desperation and a gamble that someday someone would be brave enough to tell their story. Reading those pages in the dim light of that hidden cave, I finally understood the true scope of the self-destruction paradox. The very actions taken to hide the truth had preserved it. The efforts to silence witnesses had created evidence. The attempts to erase history had documented it in detail. But understanding the truth and proving it were different challenges entirely. The men who'd orchestrated the cover-up were dead or retired, their crimes protected by classification systems and institutional amnesia. The witnesses were gone, scattered or silenced by 5 decades of systematic intimidation. Yet the letter kept haunting me. Someone claiming to be John Anglin, dying and desperate, reaching out across 50 years of silence to offer one final revelation. The FBI had dismissed it as a hoax, but their dismissal felt too quick, too certain, too reminiscent of the patterns I'd seen decades earlier. Late at night, when the pain in my chest reminded me of my own mortality, I wondered about the fates of 3 men who'd gambled everything on an impossible escape. Had they found freedom in the jungles of South America? Had they lived out their days under assumed names, carrying secrets too dangerous to share? Or had they been caught, disappeared into black sites where their knowledge died with them? The letter writer claimed John Anglin had survived into the 21st century, living with the weight of knowledge that could never be shared, watching as history branded him a criminal, while the real criminals wore badges and held office. If true, it was a torture more cruel than any prison cell, to know the truth and be unable to speak it, to carry justice in your heart while injustice wore your name. I kept the documents for 6 months before making my decision. They couldn't stay hidden. Too many people had died to protect these secrets, and too many others deserved to know the truth. But releasing them publicly would accomplish nothing except getting me killed and the evidence destroyed. Instead, I chose a different path. I copied everything, hid the copies in locations scattered across the country, and left instructions for their release upon my death. If the government wanted to suppress the truth, they'd have to do it posthumously, when I could no longer be intimidated or eliminated. The original documents I returned to their hiding place on Angel Island, along with my own written account of the investigation. Future generations might find them, might understand what they represented, might finally give Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers the justice they'd been denied for over half a century. But justice, I was learning, was a luxury the living could rarely afford. It was a gift we could only leave for the dead, a truth we could only speak when our own voices had been silenced. The morphine makes it difficult to focus, but I need to finish this recording while I still can. The doctors say hours now, maybe a day if I'm stubborn enough to fight the inevitable. I've been fighting for 78 years. What's one more battle against the darkness? I've spent 53 years carrying the weight of what I learned about Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. 53 years of waking up in cold sweats, wondering if today would be the day federal agents knocked on my door with a permanent solution to my inconvenient knowledge. 53 years of looking over my shoulder, checking my rearview mirror, and jumping at unexpected phone calls. The truth is a heavy burden when you're carrying it alone. I don't know if Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived out their days in Brazilian freedom, sipping caipirinhas on Ipanema Beach and laughing at the federal agents who'd spent decades searching for their corpses. I don't know if they died namelessly in some government facility, their final words lost in soundproof rooms designed to swallow screams. But I do know this with absolute certainty. They didn't drown in San Francisco Bay on June 11th, 1962. The evidence was always there for anyone brave enough to look past the official narrative. The car theft, the witness statements, the photographs from South America, the Christmas cards signed with familiar initials, each piece individually dismissed as coincidence or hoax, but collectively forming a picture of survival that powerful people needed to deny. The government's insistence on the drowning theory wasn't about maintaining Alcatraz's reputation or protecting prison security. It was about hiding activities that violated every principle America claimed to represent. The research programs, the intelligence operations, the systematic elimination of witnesses, all of it justified by national security classifications that turned constitutional protections into classified waste paper. Morris and the Anglins weren't just criminals who pulled off the perfect escape. They were inconvenient witnesses to state-sanctioned crimes, men whose continued existence threatened to expose a shadow government that operated beyond law, beyond oversight, beyond accountability. Their escape became their crime, their knowledge became their death sentence, their survival became a national security threat that required decades of cover-ups, intimidation, and murder to contain. I've left evidence of everything I'd discovered, hidden in multiple locations protected by legal arrangements that will trigger automatic release upon my death. Some truths are too important to die with the men who discover them. The morphine is winning now, and the room is getting darker. But before I fade away, I want to leave you with this final thought. Alcatraz was never escape-proof because its walls were too high or its waters too cold. It was escape-proof because the government made survival more dangerous than imprisonment, freedom more terrifying than captivity. The greatest prison isn't built with stone and steel. It's built with silence and fear, with official denials and convenient accidents, with careers destroyed and witnesses disappeared. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers didn't die in San Francisco Bay. The Bay didn't kill them. The silence did. And silence. Silence is the strongest prison of all. But even silence eventually comes to an end. Recording ends with the sound of steady breathing that gradually grows fainter, until only the mechanical hum of hospital equipment remains. Found among Detective Raymond Kowalski's personal effects, along with detailed instructions for the release of sealed documents and recordings. To whoever finds this recording and follows the trail I've left behind, my name was Detective Raymond Kowalski, badge number 2847, San Francisco Police Department. I died on December 20th, 2021, at 3:17 a.m., alone except for the ghosts of 3 men whose story I spent a lifetime trying to tell. If you're reading this, it means the legal mechanisms I put in place have been triggered. Safety deposit boxes in 7 different states will have been opened. Law offices in 4 different cities will have released sealed documents. Digital files stored in multiple secure locations will have been automatically transmitted to journalists, historians, and government oversight committees. I've spent 53 years preparing for this moment, the moment when my voice could finally break the silence that has protected one of the greatest cover-ups in American history. The documents you now have access to represent only a fraction of what was hidden. For every piece of evidence I managed to preserve, dozens more were destroyed by people who understood that truth was their greatest enemy. But what remains is enough. Enough to prove that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers survived their escape from Alcatraz. Enough to demonstrate the systematic suppression of evidence by multiple government agencies. Enough to show that the official narrative was a carefully constructed lie designed to protect state secrets more valuable than human lives. I need you to understand something. The men who orchestrated this cover-up weren't comic book villains twirling their mustaches in shadowy rooms. They were patriots in their own minds. They believed that protecting classified operations was more important than acknowledging 3 escaped prisoners. They convinced themselves that national security justified any level of deception, any amount of witness intimidation, any degree of evidence suppression. They were wrong. In a democracy, truth cannot be classified indefinitely. Justice cannot be postponed forever. The families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers deserve to know their fates. The American people deserve to know what their government did in their name. History deserved an accurate record, not a convenient fiction. I've carried this burden alone because I was afraid. Afraid of losing my pension, my reputation, my life. Afraid of being dismissed as a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled cop. afraid that speaking the truth would accomplish nothing except getting me killed. But fear, I've learned, is just another form of prison, and like Alcatraz itself, it's only escape-proof as long as you believe the walls are stronger than your determination to break free. To the families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, your loved ones were not the criminals history has made them out to be. They were witnesses to government crimes who paid the ultimate price for their knowledge. Whether they found freedom in South America or died in government custody, they deserved better than 50 years of official denial and systematic character assassination. To the government officials who will undoubtedly attempt to discredit these revelations, your time is over. The men who created this cover-up are dead. The operations they were protecting have been declassified or exposed through other channels. The only thing your continued denials accomplish is further damage to public trust in institutions that have already lost too much credibility. To the historians and journalists who will investigate these claims, be careful, be thorough, be brave. The people who killed witnesses and destroyed evidence may be gone, but the systems they created to protect state secrets remain in place. Truth-telling is still a dangerous profession in America. To Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, wherever your final resting places may be, your story is finally being told. Your truth is finally being spoken. Your silence is finally being broken. You escaped from Alcatraz on June 11th, 1962. You survived the waters of San Francisco Bay. You lived beyond that night, whatever your ultimate fates may have been. History will remember you not as the criminals who failed to escape, but as the men who succeeded too well for the government's comfort. Your greatest escape wasn't from prison. It was from the official narrative that tried to erase you from history. That escape, at least, was permanent. Final statement for the record. I, Detective Raymond Kowalski, being of sound mind and facing imminent death, do hereby swear under oath that every statement in this recording and its accompanying documents represents the truth as I discovered it through my official investigation into the Alcatraz escape of 1962. I have knowingly risked my career, my safety, and my life to preserve this information. I have done so not for personal gain or professional advancement, but because I believe that in a democracy, truth belongs to the people, not to the bureaucrats who find it inconvenient. If my death occurs under suspicious circumstances, if these documents are somehow suppressed or discredited, if this recording mysteriously disappears, let it stand as evidence that the cover-up I've documented continues to claim lives. But if this message reaches you intact, if the truth I've preserved finally sees daylight, then maybe, just maybe, the strongest prison of all has finally been breached. The silence is broken, the truth is free, and Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers can finally rest in peace, knowing their story has been told. Badge 2847, signing off for the final time.